Councilmember Danuski? Councilmember Danuski?
Here.
Councilmember Curtis? Excused. Councilmember Marshall?
Present.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Here.
Mayor Baker?
Excused.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
All right, everybody please stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 4, agenda approval. Unless we have any objections, we will approve the agenda as written. Okay, agenda stands approved. Citizen comments. Do we have anybody signed up for citizen comment?
There is no one.
Surprise. Nobody's signing up for citizen comment. All right. On to the business agenda. Item A, surface water management service charge analysis. Surface water manager, Richard Sawyer.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, council members. I also have with me this evening Ashley Emery. He's with Peninsula Financial Consulting, and he was the consultant that the city hired to help prepare the service charge analysis being presented this evening to council. What I'd like to do is I've just got a few slides that kind of summarize the report that was provided to council. I can go through just kind of the 3 main topics that are being discussed tonight and get through those, and then we can go back to any particular topic that council members have questions on and dive into the details at that point, if that works for everybody. So the last surface water management service charge analysis was conducted in 2008, and the results of that analysis provided rate increases which begin in 2009, and the last one is in 2012. The current rate has been in place since 2012, and there have been no increases, and prior to 2009, that was our first and only increase at that time. That rate study was conducted primarily when the first municipal stormwater permit came out, the NPDES permit. I think everyone's probably heard that term. Started ramping up a lot of the requirements of municipalities to manage their surface water systems, and so that was kind of the driving force behind that rate study and those rate increases. And also at the time, they looked ahead from 2009, kind of focused 2009 through 2012. What does the city need to start doing to meet these permit requirements? And then also they looked at what was on the books at the time for surface water management CIP that would need funding. And one point I'd like to make that becomes important too. Earlier analyses would look at just those surface water specific capital projects. So a box culvert that was going in 100% surface water funded to address a surface water specific project, or a flow control water quality facility that was needed somewhere. And I think one of the big kind of issues being missed was all the surface water components of pretty much any project. As these regulations have gotten more stringent and there's more requirements, you can have a sidewalk project, but there's surface water costs associated with that nowadays to mitigate any impacts that a non-surface water project may have. So when we went through this analysis, you will see that I've coordinated with other staff members to look at their capital projects and see any applicable capital costs associated with those as well that are eligible to be funded by surface water service charges. So the current model was adopted by King County when the city incorporated, and it's based on the amount of impervious area And the report kind of dives into a little bit more detail, but most cities still use impervious area as the building block to determine the impact that a property may have on the overarching surface water system, and then they base rates on that. And the King County model and then the city's adopted model looks at residential properties and then those very light non-residential properties that have 10% or less of impervious area and assign a flat fee. The current rate is $167.40 per parcel per year. And then when you move into the non-residential, so the commercial and multifamily properties, we have a class system based on the percentage of impervious area on that lot, starting with light up to very heavy. So starting down to that 10, 20%, all the way up to the 85 to 100% impervious area on the property. So for instance, if you were an acre and 85% of that acre was impervious area, you would fall in that very heavy category. And those rates are then determined by multiplying the area of that total parcel, so the acreage, by the rates that are shown in the chart here. So for instance, if you were a 1 acre parcel with 90% of your parcel impervious area, you would be charged 1 times that $2,594 rate, and that would be your overall surface water charge. The like a couple other comments on just kind of how our model works. In this analysis, we did look at how this ends up dividing that overall surface water revenue. And when we look at the total revenue and the customers that we're serving, single-family properties account for more of the impervious area, and but they're much more numerous in number. We are kind of, a bedroom community, so most of our parcels are single-family residential. But even though the multifamily, the commercial are much fewer in number, they actually still account for about 1/3 of the total impervious area in the city. So that's important to consider. And then we actually went an additional step and worked with our traffic engineering consultant and wanted to figure out not only how much impervious area there is, but really one of the driving needs for impervious area or in the right-of-way is who's out driving around and using the facilities and the roads and the right-of-way. And so we actually, traffic engineers have modeled through numerous studies and years of monitoring. They can figure out the average number of trips that a particular type of property may produce. So a gas station will produce X number of trips on average per day through any given year. Apartments, they'll produce Y. Single family produces a certain number. So we can run through that with all the different uses in the city and found out that almost 3/4 of the actual trips on any given day are being produced by the smaller number of commercial and multifamily parcels. And so that's also important to consider when you're kind of looking at the overall proportion of the revenue that we're bringing in from our customers for the final product. And at the end, it kind of basically splits almost down the middle. Our current rate structure will give us about 55% of our revenue from single families and 45% from the commercial multifamily. And then depending on discounts in place, those can shift about 3 to 4% in any given direction. And we'll talk a little bit more about the discounts soon. The first issue that we're talking about today, as I mentioned, is we've proposed some rates for council to consider, and I've shown those here. And we can come back, and I've got Ashley here, and he's got a great model, so we can dive into the details on why these numbers are what they are, and then what happens if we move these numbers around. He can go through the model and show, okay, what happens if we don't do anything, what happens if we put this rate in. We're going to talk about a general facilities charge here shortly, and he can show what happens with or without that. Some of the capital project projections we have in there, he can modify those, and you can see the results of those. So we can dive more into that in a moment. But these are the rates that, through all the analysis we found would basically produce a sustainable surface water management fund for the next 6 years.
Okay, we've got a question. Councilmember Shrubnik.
Just a quick question. The percent increase is pretty steep between 2018, 2019, and then 2019 to 2020. I mean, 20%. And then, you know, tails off to very, very little, 5%-ish. Can you talk about that? Are we just trying to sort of catch up to the King County level at the 240, or what? I mean, I'm curious.
Certainly, and we can we dive in more into the numbers and show what happens if we shuffle things around, and it might become more apparent when you can see the whole model. But there are there is some catch up to do, and there's some front end loaded with just capital projects in particular that are hitting us hard up front, and this allows us to kind of tackle those projects as well as then kind of create that sustainable bottom line as we move forward. But I think that when Ashley pulls this model up, if you'd like to see that, it really demonstrates that a little bit better. So we can come back to that.
Thanks.
And I think, yeah, you mentioned, I forgot to mention here, with our previous increases, you can see the percent jumps that occurred during the 2009 through 2012 increases. So they were roughly about 41%, 19%, 16, and then a small one in 2012. And I don't think the intent is to catch up with King County or anyone in particular. These numbers are just what we need to fund the programs and projects that the city wants to do. So.
I just need to add to that the city wants to do and that the state is requiring. So it's a combination of state requirements that have been ramping up over the years, plus capital projects that that we're recommending that you accomplish. You do have some flexibility here, as Ashley will show you. You can choose not to do some capital projects if you're not comfortable with the rate increase, but we'll show you all those trade-offs as we get into Ashley's model.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just kind of a general overview of what our current model is and the rates we're at, and then kind of what we're proposing to go forward to just meet the needs that we have currently in the budget, which Ashley can show in more detail shortly. The second issue that we're going to be discussing tonight is the implementation of a general facilities charge. And again, we have Ashley here to dive into any details that council members may have questions on. But in general, the general facilities charge, which kind of has a, common names, a hookup fee or a connection fee with sewer and water. It's very common. It's becoming relatively common in the stormwater world. There are dozens of cities now that are implementing some kind of connection fee with their stormwater utility. And it basically is a mechanism for new development and redevelopment to kind of buy into that existing system and pay their equitable share of the system's cost that kind of came before them. And Ashley can go kind of into the more detailed analysis if council has any questions, but we basically kind of assess the cost, the entire cost of the system as it exists, and then and you see the number presented on the slide there. And then since the impervious surface area is kind of our mechanism for assessing the surface water impact, we have the total impervious surface area in the city. So I'm probably oversimplifying. I hope you're not over there cringing, but you basically can use those two variables and you come out with this per square foot of impervious surface area cost that becomes your general facilities charge. And what we've presented is the kind of the maximum amount that the model would support for what we're calling an equivalent residential unit. So we take that typical single-family property that's being developed and which has about 2,500 square feet of impervious surface area, And similar to our rate structure, we kind of, we make that the basis of our GFC, and that single family just has that flat 2,500 square foot assumed typical development. And you multiply that by the GFC component we've calculated, and you can come out to a maximum of $7,100. And this would represent just that maximum GFC amount supported by the model, but we're coming with a recommendation to go with $3,500. And again, we can come back and dive into the details of that as well.
And to add to that, this GFC directly affects the rate that is charged annually to people. And the reason is the rate is also helping to pay for capital. So the higher the GFC, the lower the rate can be on your homeowners and property owners for the annual rate. That's something important to know here is, and Richard did point out, you can go, the model supports as high as $7,100. But we're recommending $3,500, but if you wanted to go higher, the model certainly justifies that.
Yeah, and I think a good point I forgot to make too is that these funds are for capital projects, so this would support the capital program.
Correct.
Yeah.
Councilmember Marshall?
When would it be applied to new developments, and at what point?
We would recommend that, and both for the rates and the general facilities charge, that these would be effective in 2019.
That mean developments that are already permitted at that point, or where in the permitting process?
Yeah,
so you don't vest until you get your building permit.
Yeah.
That's my experience from my last city. So you can apply for a land use permit and you're not vested under old rules, but once you get your building permit, then I believe you're vested. So properties with building permits in hand now probably won't be charged the GFC. Mm-hmm. Those who do not have building permits yet will probably be charged the GFC if they still don't have a building permit on January 1st.
Yeah. And then the last point, how this would work with the non-single family parcels is once you establish that ERU, that equivalent residential unit, that would then be applied to the non-residential parcels, similar to the rate where if you had a commercial project coming in with 10,000 square feet of a new impervious surface being proposed, that 10,000 square feet would be divided by the ERU, which is 2,500 square feet, and so it would be 4 times that ERU, so that $10,000 commercial project would be charged 4 times whatever that GFC amount that council approves.
Councilmember Shubnik?
Maybe we'll talk about this, but the assumption is, I'm still struggling with this, 2,500 square feet ISA is an assumption for single-family homes?
Correct. That's so a typical new single-family residential parcel would be presumed to have about 2,500 square feet of impervious area.
So that must include things like driveways and things. Okay, I see.
Correct,
what you're saying.
yeah.
Okay, because, okay, it's not just the footprint of the house. Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
Do we have
And
another-
that's so the new, what a typical house now being developed in kind of a new smaller lot situation, that's kind of what you see now in general, is that probably 2,200 to 2,500 square foot kind of overall footprint.
So if somebody were to tear down a house and build a new house of similar size on the property, would they be assessed? I mean, let's say that the impervious surface doesn't change on the lot. They just build something new on the old footprint or relative to the old footprint. Would they then get charged the fee or not?
I think I've got 2 answers. First, if a single-family resident would just be, regardless of what they actually do, similar to the surface water rates, it's just that one ERU. So you don't capture kind of those extremes. You could have a new single-family home be built that's 5,000 square feet, but if it's single family, it's just being charged that one ERU. You don't start multiplying until you get to the non-residential properties. And that's the same with the rate structure too, which is the $167 rate that we currently have. It doesn't matter if you have, 1,000 square feet of impervious area or 5,000 square feet of impervious area. And then second, I think I would have to make sure with you, but redevelopment would trigger GFC or
Only on non-commercial, commercial.
only on non?
As he said, it's predicated off of two things. One,
Can we get you on a mic really quick?
since you do not delineate between residences, a residence is a residence, single-family residence, the charge, just like the monthly rate, the GFC is the same for everyone. And because that, even if it redevelops, they've already paid as a fully vested single-family residence. So the only trigger for a GFC, other than brand-new construction, would be somebody whose change of use requires a new permit, and therefore then you'd have that chance, just as you have in water and sewer, the other utilities.
So it's very much like our transportation impact fees and things like that. Okay.
Is this strictly detached SFRs, or does this also include attached townhomes? And if so, I'm just wondering how that 2,500 factors in if it's a three-story townhome that actually may only have half that size of a footprint plus a small driveway.
It's the definition of the property. So that townhome is most likely zoned as a multifamily, and therefore it would be non-residential, fall into the commercial classification, and there is always that that disconnection with all the utilities between multifamily and single-family residence in that it's very hard to create a relationship between there.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at then is if theoretically you would have a smaller impervious footprint on a townhouse, but then you would end up falling under the commercial rates?
Yes.
So it could be higher than a single family?
Chances are a townhome like that would be considered a light, so they'd be ended up charging. The disconnect comes in that, as you said, it could be a 3, 4, 5 unit. They're paying the same as a single-family residence that has similar footprint, but only 1 to 2 people, or average of 2.5 people compared to.
Yeah, I'm not explaining. I apologize. So actually, I didn't mean three units on top of each other. I meant one home. Say it's on a townhouse site that's 2,500 square feet, and maybe its whole impervious surface is like 1,500 to 1,800 square feet.
Yeah, if it's sold as a single-family residence, then they are lumped in with every other single-family residence.
So I guess just so I understand, so they're going to pay though the same fee on the GFC as somebody building a 4,000 square foot house with a 3-car garage.
Yes. And that is typical across the utilities for single-family residences. Utilities in water and sewer, they do it based on the water meter size or the sewer line size. But 5/8 by 3/4 fits just about everything you can do with a single-family residence, and stormwater follows suit in the sense that unless you want to manage every single property for a unique footprint and have it.
So in your professional opinion, then, does it seem reasonable that they would be equal for somebody who's trying to have a smaller footprint versus somebody who's got a half-acre site and wants to build a big mansion?
Well,
I'm just curious. I'm not actually trying to make a judgment.
Yeah, we had hour-long discussions about this, and it was one of the reasons why we did a lot of the technical work, was because there's really not a great correlation between impervious surface area and either the system at large and its capital cost or its maintenance costs.
Okay.
Which is why Richard mentioned the trip mileage. The real driver of cost for stormwater is water flow management. But the reason why we're concerned about it is water quality, and that's driven by automobile usage. So stormwater is in its infancy, and nobody has thought up of any other criterion to use other than impervious surface area as to be able to segregate customers and assess different costs. And just for that reason, because impervious surface area is the only metric out there, but it's not a great metric when it comes down to it. So we were attempting, the hope was to actually go down the route of instituting a co-charge. We recognize flow is a factor, and your size and your imprint does impact the system, but so does the fact that the gas station puts through 400 cars a day. And that's where the pollution comes from that we have to worry about running off. That's why we have to control and worry about the stormwater. It's the pollution from cars, not the actual amount of flow. That's not the driver. So yes, there is that disconnect, and it doesn't mean it's impossible. No city likes to go through the fact of having 5,000 single-family residences and having 5,000 different charges. But just like you've done in the commercial, there's nothing saying you couldn't classify 3 residential sizes, small, medium, large, or small and large, and say, hey, you're 3,000 or above, sorry, we're not going to give you the same rate as the smaller one. Just depends on what the logistics you're willing to go.
Well, this is, and when he pulls up his model, we'll see the whole picture of this, but this is showing kind of the implementation of all the recommendations here, including the GFC.
Not under operating.
Well, under operating, it would just be rate driven, correct?
It's rate driven. It's primarily from the rate increases, but we've also got a readjustment of the commercial rates. Your existing rates, Richard, could we roll back to the rate slide?
I don't know, would that readjustment change the overall operating revenue?
Yeah, we're getting 208 more thousand a year out of this readjustment.
Okay.
Yes, we're getting it in 2 years. It's a phase-in implementation. I don't have that slide. Okay, so we're going from 1.9 to basically 2.5, so about 600,000 in the first year. That's a 20% rate increase of about 450 plus the 105,000 from the structural change. Then the next year we're doing 20% again, and that's on 2.5 million at that point. So we're looking at 500 grand, and we get another grand, 100 grand from the second phase of the structural change. So that's where we go from 2.5 to 3.1.
That was strictly the rate adjustment, and that was excluding
It's no GFC. It's purely we're doing proposing an across-the-board rate increase of the 20% and 19%. But we're also getting, over 2 years, an extra $208,000 from realignment of these rate categories. Just take a quick second. If you look at the 2018 rates, and if you compare them to the ratio of impervious surface area for each of the classifications, the ratio from the first classification to the fifth classification, if that ratio has gone up by 5, then to be linear, then that rate should have gone up by 5 times. It was not to scale with your existing rates. So by just bringing those into alignment, 3 or 4 of those rate classifications went up just as a result of that realignment, and that was an extra $200,000.
So that's an important, I guess, philosophical change we're talking about in the model. Did everybody catch that? Because that is important. So what we're doing is we're proposing that commercial pay more of their fair share, and it's going to result in a larger increase for them than it is going to be for the residential. So the currently, the way it is now, what people pay in commercial doesn't go up proportionally with the amount of impervious surface they have right now. This changes that so it is more proportional. Our proposal changes it so it is more proportional with the impervious surface that they have.
There was no the previous imbalance. There was no rationality to it. The numbers, there was no trend there. There was no, give these class 20% reduction.
Yeah, so if you went from 20% to 30% and you had a first rate to the second rate and then 30 to 40, there was
not greatly off. Not greatly off, but $200,000 off, 10% off of your, or 20% off. So that's not insignificant for needed to be corrected.
So it's fair to say, just by this from 2019 to 2020, and that's basically $600,000 that is just property tax fee to the businesses, property owners. That's how basically how it reads in the, we can break it all down.
And in the big picture, it's from a utility rate specialist, it's probably about a third assigned to needed to the fund's got to generate net cash. There should be a cushion there. You need to be building reserves for eventualities. So a third of it is to true that up, is to get the long-term picture black without any capital. The remaining 2/3 is you're planning on $17 million in capital expenditures over the next 10 years out of this stormwater fund. And even with issuing debt to smooth it out, that capacity, it's helped with the GFC. We get another couple $100,000 from that, but you need a significant, and again, it's because the stormwater is new. Every utility goes through this. The system was there. It was built with grants over years by developers, by other parties, and now all of a sudden you have to manage it and pay for it and operate it and replace it and improve it, and you haven't had the time to build that capital component into the rates. This is doing it, and you're having to go from 0 to 60 in 4 or 5 seconds.
I think a lot of this will make more sense as we dive into the model.
Yeah. Hey, Markson. And just to finish off my last slide before diving in, the third topic that was being discussed was the private facility maintenance rate reduction. So currently, parcels that build an engineered facility to manage either flow control, water quality, or both, our policies allow a 10 to 40% reduction in their service charge for the ongoing maintenance of those facilities. And the facilities are required, as part of the development to mitigate the surface water impacts. And so the rate reduction is necessary, but being relatively new, surface water management probably really started taking off in the 90s. It was a tool that was likely used to incentivize folks to just, okay, we got to build these things now, and we'll give you a little bit of a break if you maintain them. But I think one of the factors, and I prepared this slide to really show that it doesn't really provide a long-term sustainable revenue source. And what I mean by that is I'm using the development across the street here as an example. On the left, I show an aerial photograph and highlighted the parcels in red that have been developed. And unfortunately, in our GIS, I can't show kind of what was there in 2012 because everything's new, and so our maps are showing what's new. But there used to be an old park and ride there, and they had an old early 80s pipe that was at the time, a state-of-the-art detention facility. But other than that, there was nothing else in these red shaded areas. And so as a private facility, we would go out and inspect that one pipe in the morning, either maintained it or not, and then we would send off a letter. And King County, as an owner at the time, I think, could get up to the discount, which I've shown there. So the swim fee in 2012 would have been $18,809 for all these parcels. The discount for that one parcel with the pipe would bring it down to about $18,200. Then over the next few years, on the right you can see 2018, these parcels have developed. Went from a $7.5 million assessed value to over $103 million assessed value. All the infrastructure there I've highlighted are what my inspectors have to go out and annually inspect and make sure these water quality facilities are being maintained. They have to enforce maintenance, look for any other issues. And then really also what I'd like to point out, and I think Ashley touched on a little bit earlier, was that you can imagine not just on this property, but the density and volume of people and traffic now being produced from these properties are using the city's right-of-ways, the parks. So we're also having the surface water system all over the city more heavily used with the development of these properties, and that's really what swim fees are paying for. They're paying for us to go and work on all the roadway facilities and the facilities in the parks, and as well as just the enforcement of the development within the private parcels. So this discount, as you can see, so the same parcel shaded in red on the right, their fees now are $13,166. So it's a little counterintuitive. On one hand, you can understand they have to build this facility and it does have a cost to them, but then on the other side of the coin, it's a lot more resources and staff time for the city as well. So it's I just wanted to point out, you're reducing the revenue while increasing the resources required by the city to support that. And I just wanted to provide a concrete example as we have that discussion about the private facility maintenance discount that we offer, so you can kind of see what the impacts are.
Councilmember Smith.
Tell me, when we look at this slide, specifically the photo on the right with that site plan and all the different facilities, just ballpark, how much time does it take if you were to do your inspections on all the facilities you see on that entire site? What are we talking about, even just ballpark as far as time for something like that?
For what's there now, I mean, that's pretty much at least a day out doing the inspections. And then the follow-up really depends on how good the property management is, because then the inspector has to produce a maintenance correction letter that goes out to the property owners. And some are really great. They've got a crews in place. They do what's required. They sign off. They send it back. Other ones require re-inspections, follow-up, enforcement. There's always some of that going on. And then actually this is also good to consider when we get into the actual budget discussion later. This is just one little area. The facilities like this have been growing all over the city, so we have a lot more of these now than we did, back in 2012.
Okay, thanks.
So, Richard, you gave us a good example here. I'm kind of curious, under the proposal from staff, what would do we know what the swim fee would be for this property next year?
I don't exactly, but if you wanted a rough idea, you could apply basically a 20% increase. It might be a little bit more than 20% because these are on the heavy side, which when you do the realignment.
If it holds true for the discount, which is roughly about 50%, then so you'd be looking at, if he'd be paying $13,000 with the discount.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Do you mean with or without a discount applied?
The proposal is to do away with the discount. Did I hear that right?
It looks to be about a $5,000 hit.
Yeah, and what I'm showing are current rates, so.
Right. So we're talking about getting rid of the discount, and we're talking about the increases that you're proposing, right?
Yeah, so next year you could take their base fee would be, this year's $18,809. You could increase that by 20% to get an idea of what it would be in 2019. And if the discount were removed, that would be the fee. If the discount were in place, these properties would, I think most of them fall into that 30% discount, so that's what they would have 30% deducted. And I would also point out that if council considers and chooses to eliminate the discount, would still need to be in place for next year, because the facilities that took place this year, those property owners have been notified, and then the discount is always applied to the following year. So the ones that earned their discount this year, it's applied next year, so the rate discount changes would be applied in 2020.
Okay, thank you.
So that covered kind of the three main topics in the report. So now basically I'd like it to open up and we can dive into more detailed questions if any council members have any. You want me to switch over?
Councilmember Smith?
I do have a question on, and you touched on it just a minute ago, but could you explain again the discount and exactly why we granted the discount in the first place? Because then it will help me understand why we're getting rid of it potentially.
Well, the discount, when we adopted King County's swim rate model, we adopted the discounts that they had in place at the time. So I can't really speak to why they put those in place. But as I mentioned, during the earlier years when surface water management was kind of taking off, it was a hard pill to swallow. So I imagine it provided an incentive to developers to kind of, once they build these facilities, keep them operating and maintain them. And we did modify the actual structure of those discounts. We have 10 to 40%, and that's based on the performance. So if a facility was designed under like a pre-1998 design manual, we're only going to provide that facility 10% discount. And then if it was built all the way up to our most current manual, they can get up to 40%. King County's model that we had for a while could have been as high as, I think, 50 to 55%, because they would basically just, if you maintain your facility, they just knocked you down an entire rate class.
Once you set your rates 100% impervious surface area and you require a developer to mitigate his runoff, he's got a philosophical argument of saying, why should I be charged the same as the next person that isn't doing that?
Right.
Yeah. And it does shift the focus too, which I brought up earlier, that folks aren't paying surface water fees to manage the surface water on their property. They're paying surface water fees for the city to manage the collective good of the entire city's surface water system, which everyone has a vested interest in.
Boy, it's like reading an encyclopedia tonight. There's a lot of information here.
But that's the connection of the earlier discussion about the disconnect
Yeah.
between, well, you're bigger than, and basing everything based off of impervious surface area. You're saying this is the sole criteria that we're going to judge this. We're going to mete out the costs.
Any other questions?
Different one.
City Attorney?
I have a couple of clarifying questions concerning townhomes. Are townhomes on legally separate lots considered single-family residences in this analysis?
Where I'm using revenue numbers provided by the city, as long as that property has been charged, we're basing our numbers based on the actual revenue collected from the existing rates.
Okay,
So-
but I guess I was more curious about the GFC. What is the category for a townhome? For example, on separate legal lots versus side-by-side on one parcel, is there a distinction there?
We'd be happy to look further into that, and we can get a specific answer. But I know with the rates that does come up, and townhomes, multiple townhomes on one lot will typically get assessed as a non-single-family residential.
So they'd
And
be
if there are,
multifamily?
what's that?
I take it they'd be multifamily then. That's what I was trying to clarify.
Correct. There's not really, you're either residential or you're not single-family residential. But I think we do have a few cases where townhomes are split, where each parcel is a townhome with a single owner. And I would have to look back and see if they're single-family or still assessed as a non-single-family.
All right. Yeah, we
Comes
can
up with
talk
the-
about that later.
Comes up with other utilities. I've seen it defined up to 3 units as being considered a single-family classification. So
Yeah.
it'll be whatever your zoning, whatever your
Okay, thanks.
local code stipulates.
And I know Ashley does have his model up now, too, if anyone wanted to dive into any of those numbers.
Yes, Ashley, could you walk them through it, especially show how having the capital program affects rates, and also talk to them about the assumption of the smoothing out that we're recommending with debt. So if you could walk them through that piece.
Okay. All of a sudden, my cursor doesn't want to work. I'm getting a Wi-Fi busy.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, just a brief orientation. This is the summary level. We start with, this is your basic operations. And that's just your rate revenues from monthly rate revenues and your operating expenditures. We throw debt into here, which right now you don't have any, but if we decide to debt fund a capital project, then that'll roll into there. It's not mandatory that you pay debt out of operating funds, but you don't have the growth levels or the capital revenue to support it anywhere else, and debt has to be paid. So it's quite common to treat debt as an operating expense from a cash flow standpoint. And then we're keeping track of your bottom line, your reserve accounts, the money in hand that you have to take care of all those contingencies and to self-finance projects at some point. It's all based on more detailed breakdown below, and all we've assumed at this point, we don't have any employee additions. The only cost drivers for expenditures are just inflation, cost of living for salaries, just base levels like that, and that's where you're seeing a slight growth from year to year there. Right now, you're not seeing any revenue increase, but we have loaded in your capital projects.
Do you mind just expanding that screen a little bit on capital, just to show them what we have in there for capital projects? And then can you go to the bottom line to show them the total too? So you can see there's kind of a hump in capital.
Now, that includes this, which is an internal transfer, but we can get that on the these are your total capital expenditures on this line.
Yeah.
As you can see, 17 million over 10 years. So what you're seeing here is doing nothing. This is take no action and try and build capital, which is obviously a fallacy because it can't be done. But you can see at this point, not only will you cease to be operating and paying for operating expenses by in a couple of years, you're certainly not have no capacity to do capital. So the first thing we looked at was the rate structure change. And we considered a 2-year implementation there. And you can see that bumped us up and brought us into the positive from an operational standpoint. As I said, it's a $208,000 total that we reached in the 2-year chunk. So it's a nice starting point. Obviously, we're still capital intensive. We're not paying. We're not actually having enough funds to do much. So the GFC was the next implementation, and you'll see that in the connection charge and interest line. So that's $2,800 based on some money in the bank at this year, and then zeros. And so doing 1,000 makes us $100,000 a year, and that's assuming a pretty modest growth level. So we looked at doing a reasonable amount that would get us somewhere positive. We've only got growth going out for a few years, so that's why it sinks down to zero. But you can see that'll raise $2.5 million over the next 6-7 years. So out of $17 million, that's a nice chunk of it. So at this point, we haven't affected the O&M other than the structural change, but you can see we're driving down the capital hit. So the last option before rate increases, because it's very simple, you can't build your way out of, from a rate standpoint, a capital. If you try and do that, it can be done. But what happens is you see you're having to spike rates so much to get immediate cash flows that as soon as the capital is over, you either have to do a massive rate reduction or you're sitting there on revenues that are totally out of whack with what's necessary. And that's why debt funding is there. That's the whole point. So specifically, this project was already funded by a PWF.
Yeah, the 190th culvert. So you're actually building the model right before their eyes.
So you can see that dropped off $1.6 million, but now we're having a debt payment. So now we're increasing the burden on our rate revenues, but we'll address that shortly. These three projects were also looked at from a funding standpoint, and these will be internally funded, but those still require interest costs. So we've shaved off a few more million. And that was the last. Let's try the right one. Sorry about that. All right, now we've got a manageable level. We start out with a 20% adjustment. Okay, now all of a sudden we bought ourselves 4 or 5 years. But as you can see with the debt payments now, we've still got operational issues. That takes us up basically to the King County rate. And then we're looking at a cost of living. And with that, with all those adjustments in hand, we've bought you operating stream that is, when it settles down, is doing about what it should be from a utility standpoint. 10 to 15% is a nice rule of thumb for any utility to be spinning off, as a due matter, of course.
And if you look at the end of year cash, that settles out pretty well too and doesn't just climb like crazy after the projects are over.
And that's the initial when I said you can't drive this, you can't solve this with a rate revenue problem because then you're imbalanced. The issue of debt combined with a rate increase and doing the big stuff up front, it's a cumulative effect. Having those extra years without revenue there, yes, you could pull those down. As Rob said, choice is simple here. Decide less capital, rate comes down. If you do not want to, if you want the capital, if you want to fund the capital, but you don't like taking the big rate increases up front, you're going to end up with a higher rate at the end because you lose those large amounts of revenue in the first couple of years that are then there for multiple years after there. So it can be tailor-made. You can adjust this as you see fit, but this approach will result in the lowest, in 5 or 6 years, the lowest total rate for that single-family residence for everybody.
So our capital program is driving a lot of this, and so I'm not necessarily suggesting this, but if you wanted less aggressive rate increases or less aggressive GFC, one option is to build less capital. Yeah.
Hang on, Councilmember Danuski had a question.
Yeah, just curious to see such an exercise. Like, what would happen if you did a percent rate?
You're still fine from a 5-6 year period. And frankly, from a utility, a capital financing standpoint, 10 years, there's going to a lot change in 10 years. So that's perfectly viable from a financial standpoint. I would not walk away saying, boy, I really let that client down with that. But you will, as long as you continue with, if these capital projects are as planned and you want to fund them as planned, then you will be doing additional rate increases in the next 10 years.
Yeah, but to be in the black through 2026, that's better than a poke in the eye for sure.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what if we looked at, like, instead of 3.5, what if we did 5% for the next few years, just to...
You want to keep the 15s and then go
Yeah,
to 5?
I have a similar concern around the massive kind of increases to start.
Let's see what we can then. See, you're at a, this is a timing issue here, solely a timing issue. And capital, moving capital, delaying capital a year, or packaging up is trivial. So I don't look at that as a big problem. You're rebounding. So
15% went down to 12.9% somehow.
yeah, no, I think you could.
Yeah.
I think he was playing with it to see how far you
Definitely
could
the
push things.
15 is now, you're actually better off with the 15s and 5s. And from a political standpoint, because we built in roughly from 2 to 3 to 4% on inflationary factors for salaries and other items, you know, at 5%, you're essentially 1.5 points above inflation. So from a rate standpoint, it's a nuance to obviously to the public, but there's a big difference. If we wiped out the inflationary factors, then we could wipe out, that would be 1.5% instead of 5.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, so you're hitting a number of the things that I was actually very interested in, and I like seeing these changes because it is more of an evened out increase rather than a shot in the arm all at once. What I wanted to do, could you show us the capital projects that are on here? And then while you're doing that, I had one question on, are there any like legislative caps or anything on any aspect of these rate charges and fees? Or do we as a municipality have 100% flexibility?
Yes. It's an enterprise fund. It is self-financing. It has to pay for itself.
Okay.
And we
And I
don't,
think
That's good, but that's also really scary.
yeah, and we're not regulated by the UTC like the garbage utility is or the electric utility is, because we're a government body, so we have the regulatory authority.
Okay.
One point to make before we go into this capital thing is you have no utility tax on your surface water utility. So think about that for a minute. Other cities do have utility taxes on their surface water utility, and those utility taxes go straight to the general fund. So,
Yeah, for instance, Kirkland has a 6% tax on themselves for the surface water utility.
So they tax their fees.
yep, and those go straight to the general fund to be used for general fund purposes.
Yeah, that's creative.
And another, it's nuanced again here, but percentages lie. 100% increase on 10 cents is 10 cents. It's not the end of the world. Your stormwater is a quarter of what sewer is, a third of what water is. So a large percentage, yes, it sounds bad, but from a monetary standpoint, we're talking about going from $16 a month to $22 in the end result. And it's, yes, I'm not saying that diminishing the importance of it, but in that context, the percentage just, it sounds a lot worse than it is. It's a cup of coffee.
So actually, you just answered a question I had, because in the upper left corner, I thought maybe I was misreading something, but it says residential storm monthly bill. Is that incorrect?
That's a carryover. I'm used to dealing in monthly rates.
Okay,
I apologize. Yes, that would be, yes.
Otherwise, it's a beautiful spreadsheet, but that part was confusing me. So.
Get the pitchforks ready. I'm not going to get out of town, yes.
So just as by way of background, I've known Ashley for a lot of years. He did several water, sewer, and stormwater rate studies for me when I was in Gig Harbor. And
No connection.
so anyway, he really produced good work for me several times when I was in Gig Harbor, and so I wanted to utilize his services again. And he is coming to us from the Kitsap Peninsula. So, all right.
These are the capital. That's what caused the problem. It would just went. So that's we go down a few more rows. More than a few, but it's a long list. And the small stuff, there was a reason you don't go out and debt finance a $100,000 project. It's not how it's done. So you only have a few projects, large projects, that you can go after for that. But by doing that, we smooth things out, and then the extra cash and the GFCs, now you're able to, okay, yeah, $600,000 over these years, no big deal. It's paid for.
Councilmember Marshall?
Weren't the sidewalks largely funded from another fund? I see, because I see the sidewalk gap on one of these projects. But then if there's something being taken from stormwater management, just very briefly, like where's the infrastructure difference for those two funding sources?
Well, I can speak to, as far as I mentioned earlier, I mean, some of these projects probably have funding sources from various sources, and currently that's what they're going to have to rely on. But the surface water component, so if you're building infrastructure specific to the stormwater utility, this fund can legally pay for it, and that's what hadn't been considered before. So with what we're proposing, these funds would now be available for those projects. Now, to answer more specifically about what happens kind of after that, I don't know if Rob or Joanne wants to speak to that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I captured the question, but so with a lot of these projects, you can justify a surface water component with the project. So for sidewalk gaps, some other funding source will pay for most of the sidewalk, but there's a piece of it that helps surface water. For example, the curb and the gutter channel surface water, and so you can use surface water money to pay for the curb and the gutter and the catch basin that collects the water. You can't use surface water money to pay for the actual sidewalk, and so the sidewalk gap number in our CIP is actually much bigger. It's like $100,000 a year or something like that. And so of that $100,000 a year, we can justify using about $15,000 a year of it with surface water funds. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I'll get to you in just 2 seconds. I actually have kind of a follow-up. So I see some walkways and waterways projects on here also. Are those getting funded through, or is bond money from the walkways and waterways bond money getting put into SWIM and then, no?
No, this will be in addition to the bond money. So this will supplement that project.
Okay. Councilmember Smith?
Shop is what percentage of, I can't remember what our total costs were, but what percentage is that 3.25 million of our cost of the land and shop? Or is that 100%?
50.
So Surface Water Fund is paying 50%, so that amount represents 50% of the total.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you.
other questions?
Can we go back up to when we changed some of these rate increase years? And I just want to look at the net results on the long-term projections again on this. So what, could you change the rate increase from 5 to 4% on all those years out after the 15?
Again, still acceptable.
Yeah, that's doable.
Okay. That's a lot of money. So what do you need?
Yeah, Hey, you guys are asking for some direction. You guys are going to come back to us at a later date with the final
Well,
on the 19th, right?
correct. We'd like to, well, from what's being presented today, if there's any direction or preference that council has, we can include this with the fee schedules that are coming on November 13th, I believe. And so that's what we would, if this looks good to council, we could propose that in that fee schedule for 2019, a 15% increase with the rate shown here.
I'd be okay with it. I mean, relative to, I guess, I don't know.
Do you want to make a motion, or?
Yeah, I'm comfortable doing that. I'll move that we have the 15% on the first, the 2019, 2020, and then follow it up with 4% annually after that.
Do we have a second? We got a motion and a second. Discussion? Councilmember Shribnick.
Yeah, I mean, I'll vote for this if this is what people want. I guess, I mean, what I feel like you're hearing from the first comment to the last comment is, you know, is there a way to both minimize the increase, particularly the bump up front, and smooth it out? So, I mean, that which is what you're doing, but I don't know whether the magic number is 15% or 12%, as we saw a couple minutes ago. There's nothing magic about 15% because it's divisible by 5. That's, you know, I mean, the 12% worked if you change the other one to 5%. So it's, you know, there's nothing magic about it. So I think, you know, both minimizing to the extent feasible. It doesn't look like there's anything that can be moved later because a lot of those big projects are tied. I mean, they're time sensitive. I mean, they're tied to particular time frames. So I don't think we have a lot of latitude there. At least I didn't see it. So just, you know, minimizing to the extent possible. Yeah.
And to that point, I think the last rate increase did bumps over 4 years. So you did a bump in 09, 10, 11, and 12. We're recommending doing it all in 2 years. So you do have the ability to spread it out over a 4-year plan or whatever. Is that kind of what you might be getting at, Councilmember Shribnick?
Well, I mean, I think what we're hearing multiple times is a bit of a shock, not real comfortable with the big increases over 2 years. Those absolute percentages, 20%, as was in the original model, is very steep. You know, again, I will be fine with the 15 and 4 unless there's a even nicer, less impactful model that you can come up with.
Ashley, can you back that down to 9?
I mean, couldn't you, if on your note, I mean, couldn't it be something like an 8% annual then, almost over the whole term, rather than,
Yeah, I mean,
or something like that?
Yeah, right. I
If
mean, if
you
we
want
want to. Yeah, I mean, I've looked to you to, I mean, is that what people want?
I think, so part of it, I looked at, part of it was catch-up.
Yeah. Right.
that there was a catch-up part that made sense to maybe have it a little, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah, no,
just
I agree.
talking to you, assuming that it's just you and I in the room. But I'm not,
Show.
I can,
yeah.
I think Ashley's preparing kind of a response to your question, but he touched on that earlier where kind of having that hump in the beginning and the long run is actually better. And so that's what I think he's going to prepare for you. If you try and do smaller bites, you end up actually with a much larger rate at the end of the 6 years as a result.
So this is, we're basically in an equivalence here from an endpoint in this time frame, smooth it out completely. And if we can just remember, we end up at 334.63.
And where do we end up originally?
At the 15s,
And there-
91.
Yeah.
So it's, as I said, the power of doing the, biting the bullet.
Makes sense.
That's a tough sell to somebody who's, where are you going to be in 8 years kind of a thing. But from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, this is the long-term best benefit for people who are long-term residents who are going to be moving in the next few years. I'd rather this is my future than 330.
Any other discussion?
No, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay, clerk,
It's-
please. Okay, clerk, please take the roll. Take the vote.
Okay, Councilmember Danuski,
Yes?
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shrebnick,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig.
Yes.
Passed.
All
Thank
right,
you.
so you're going to compile that and bring that back to us with the fee rate increases on the 19th?
Correct. Second, we still had the general facilities charge.
Right.
So
You had that in here already, right?
In the model, yes,
Yeah.
but it's at 3,500 starting next year.
Yeah.
If you chose to raise that, you could shave off. But 3,500 is
Big chunk.
it's not aggressive, but it's in the area of Western Washington from a standpoint. You're not an outlier. If you could keep going too much higher, yes, you probably are.
And Councilmember Shrebnick?
Do we have those figures? Because I remember seeing the table that showed the residential against the other cities. And we were like, at 167 was like the same as Bothell, but it was way under King County. And I mean, you know, it was, but I don't remember seeing the other figure relative to other places.
GFCs
The GFC.
are not universal on stormwater, and they are so specific. I've got water utilities where the GFC is 2,500. I've got the same size city next door that they're 10,000.
Really?
It's where you are in your capital program that really drives it. And you have, $105 million in infrastructure.
Right.
And so many customers. So and that's 7,000. So you guys are doing a modest approach at this. And just, to be fair, the calculations aren't, this is case law, this is industry practice. It's supposed to duplicate fair and reasonable. But when it comes down to it on the GFC, there's so many issues involved. Doing what's fair almost just passes a smell test is pretty darn good. And 3,500 for a new house,
Right.
yeah, it's North Shore, I would imagine from a water standpoint is 6,000 or 7,000 for a connection charge. It just puts it into context.
City Manager.
You may recall that in the CIP that we asked you to adopt a month or two ago, we had a GFC placeholder in there. And that placeholder was about $300,000 a year. And this would, under the same assumptions, this would generate $350,000 a year. So we were in the ballpark.
Yeah, and as I said, from a cash flow standpoint, we're assuming 100 ESUs, so that
And that's what Joanne and I were assuming when
would
we
be
did the
three
CIP.
or four commercials, large commercials would
That's
constitute that.
Right.
Infill, and it should be well within the.
Councilmember
it is-
Smith?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I definitely wouldn't want to go any higher on the GFC, and I mean, I know we already approved our CIP, so it makes it a little tougher to back out of it, but I know that we're going to have higher probably park and transportation impact fees, and then we started our school impact fee, so now you add the $3,500, the GFC on here. It's like, that's a lot of new money on every new start where we're trying to preserve affordability at every level.
Yep.
And so I definitely wouldn't want to see us go any higher.
I just dropped it by 500. So we're at 3,000. So we're now deficit in 2026.
Councilmember Marshall?
I was going to say, it's not just school impact fees and the park impact fees. There was also, maybe you mentioned the North Shore Utility District capacity fee. Was that the one you were alluding to when you said North Shore?
You're going to have a water connection charge.
Right.
I'm guessing here, but North Shore
3,000.
is pretty sophisticated, and they're on top of things. And I would,
Yeah.
be very. King County, Seattle is 15,000 for a single family for a
Right.
water connection charge.
North Shore Utility District was, I mean, we're still paying off ours from our brand-new house we bought in 2007, whatever it is. So that's part of it, too.
Well, and something to keep in mind, too, as we look at these is that if we lower the GFC, we are almost kind of needing to then raise rates for current folks. So that's kind of the balance that we're trying to seek here.
It is. What I like to tell clients is what's good for your everyday customer is maximizing the GFC revenue. So you do not want to stifle growth because then it benefits nobody from a revenue standpoint. But every dollar that doesn't stifle growth and you do not enact, then yes, it's coming out of rates. There's just no other place.
Yeah, but as Councilmember Smith pointed out, we're dealing with an affordable housing crisis right now that may be softening a bit, but still is wildly unaffordable in this neck of the woods. So it is a balance. Councilmember Shrubnik.
Maybe I'm not thinking about this clearly, but the GFC, so the residential rates are kind of incrementing up because there's a percentage increase. It's large and then less large. But the GFC, is that also going up, or did I miss that? Okay, so that's not going to keep pace.
And we should point out, just to make abundantly clear, GFC only applies to a brand new residence.
Right, I understand.
Yeah. Case law, technical reasons, you cannot adjust the GFC for cost of living. It's got to be based on original costs. Otherwise, games could be played with inflationary numbers. So you get bites at the apple when you do your next stormwater comprehensive plan,
Okay.
and you change your capital list. Now, we didn't include capital as a factor in this, but every year you go by, if you add infrastructure relative to that divisor of impervious surface area, if that ratio expands, then yes, the GFC can expand. Well, frankly, you're at 7,100. We can justify 7,100 as a GFC. So you could build
Oh,
up
so
to
you
that
could
in
go up
any
to that.
increment you
Okay.
want,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
You can't call it a cost of living.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
It's planned GFC increase
Right.
based on us achieving the point where we want to end up.
Right.
So that's totally within your abilities to do without second thought.
And that's the same situation with impact fees. Also, we have to justify it through our capital plan and what we're moving forward with. So,
Hey, just for giggles,
Giggles, huh?
Oh, that sounded bad. What are you going to have me do, Rob?
what if you just increase the GFC to 7,100 and then I just for the fun of it, and then see what then see how low we could get our rates based on that. And everybody understands we can legally justify 7,100 based on the model.
Doing that.
I think as Rod had asked earlier, I can follow up and give you an accurate answer, but I guess I would also ask, if 7 townhomes are going in and, is each townhome, if you could, kind of the big picture, that different in terms of the impacts that they're going to be having on the overall surface water system?
I get that. I was looking at it from a standpoint, two things. One is the townhomes are typically, you can build them at a lower dollar per square foot basis, so you're more apt to maybe be able to build something that's more affordable. And so maybe there is a way to have a second tier solely for like townhomes that are on separate, platted lots. So that was the first one. And the second one is, it would seem like, though, that if you had a 20,000 square foot site that you're putting 2 homes on, I think it would be more appealing from a growth perspective to see, 8 to 10 townhomes built on that site rather than 2 single-family detached. So I guess you could just as easily make an argument that there's probably more pervious area on 2 detached homes built on that site. So maybe the stormwater is actually less of a factor, but you're only serving 2 residences versus maybe 8 to 10.
Remember the whole discussion about
Yeah.
impervious surface area just being this.
I know.
It's the elephant in the room here. We know that townhome, the more density, it's the quality. It's what's in the water and that's what's driving most of the cost. So, yes, impervious surface area runoff. Oh, I'd like to cut them a break. They deserve it. Give them a discount. But then we miss the whole bigger picture, which is a lot of the work is flow control based on local mitigation, because all impervious surface area is just a slowing down. It's still going to hit the water table, and that's going to show up at the creek a half mile away where you have a culvert. And so regardless of what's going on there or how much or how little, it's driving things. And we do know of from the water quality, it's the cars. And that townhome, that density has gone up for pollution generation. And so, yes, I've got no problem from a philosophical standpoint charging them more, even if it's under the use of a impervious surface area term that I'm not real happy with.
So is there value to it in looking at it just from more of and I realize the money has to be used for surface water, but is there a value from looking at it from just a citywide planning perspective that maybe it makes a little more sense to keep it more attractive where you want to have your density?
Is this GFC? This is a policy. Like I said, there are bigger ramifications that occur with growth than just this utility fund. And so, yes, I mean, you can justify it on the impervious surface area as to why, in keeping with policy and other factors, that a discount, not you wouldn't call it a discount, but you have a different metric. And frankly, a townhome should result, if you do the math, you're bringing in 4 domiciles at a less per-cost domicile than building them 4 regular houses. So the property owner, the developer, is seeing a lower cost than if he does 4 standalones. As long as that footprint is smaller than the 2,500, they will get a break. His GFC will be smaller for doing those townhomes than doing 4 bigger ones.
And there's nothing, once we approve whatever gets approved here, it can be changed. Does it have to go through any other type of unique public hearing process or anything? Or how does it work if we want to make a small change to something in the GFC maybe 2 years from now?
GFCs do have a process. There's reading, it has to be publicized, public comment.
There's no special statutory process. It's whatever your rules are about giving the public an opportunity to comment.
Okay.
Unlike there are requirements for development and regulation changes, as you know, under the Growth Management Act.
There are no specific, other than procedural, which you have to obey for anything you do like that. The GFC, as long as you're under the maximum or maximum or below, you can make any nuance. Now, a GFC cannot be forgotten that a GFC, other than for single-family residences, a GFC is low-hanging fruit to the developer. And the bigger the money, the lower the fruit is hanging. And that is, if there's anything wrong from a philosophical standpoint or a technical, they will jump on it, and a lawsuit will happen, and the immediate recourse is reversion back to the previous adopted and valid GFC, but you lose that opportunity. Yes, you have carte blanche to make those changes, but they have to be technically based and fair and reasonable.
Yes, I agree with that. Which is why I asked the question early on as to whether we're treating townhomes as multifamily or single-family. But now that you've asked the question whether there can be a different rate for townhomes, we would have to justify the different rate and classification based upon an analysis by Mr. Emery.
Now, in this case, if you're going down, nobody's arguing with that. You're not going to be sued by a developer who's not a multiple family kind of a thing. And the multiple family, he's getting a break. So that's not a concern from a practical standpoint. But he's exactly right. Yes, if you're going to introduce a classification different from how it's treated, that class is treated anywhere else in the city, then there should be a rationale behind it.
Okay, Rob?
Just 2 things. I just want to reinforce or make sure you're clear that in this model, we are issuing debt for a number of projects. I think you all saw that. Okay, so I just want to get that clear. Another thing, Richard, can you talk about the rebate on the rate itself for low income?
Yeah, so there is also an additional, and we're talking the service charge rates now for low-income seniors. They actually get a full waiver of their service charge, and that's administered through King County. So I think any given year there's quite a few residential properties that will have no service water fee if they qualify for that program.
Councilman Marshall?
And besides that, was there any appeal process based on some unique circumstances somebody thought they could bring? Is there anything like that?
I'm sorry.
An appeal process to say, oh, no, the rate shouldn't apply to me here because of any number of different reasons, not including income, but unique circumstances of the property or the impervious surface or the redevelopment or anything like that. Was there any appeal process at all to reduce the fee?
There is an appeal process for any of the established rate reductions. For instance, if there's we have the private facility discount, so they could appeal an existing rate reduction policy that we have, but I don't think they could just come for anything outside of that and appeal. They wouldn't be able to come in and come up with some other reason other than the rates, the reduction opportunities that we have in our code. And I think there's a few other nuances. I mean, if you have an undeveloped property, so if there's a piece of property that's completely forested and untouched, that can have a surface water service charge waiver, low-income senior, the private facility. But outside, whatever we have established in our policies, you can't really appeal it.
The manager.
Well, so we do have a large property owner in that direction that has appealed I don't know about if appealed is the right word, but he's contested what he's been charged over the years and making arguments about impervious surface. How has that been handled?
Just about every year I meet with that property owner and we update impervious areas on non-residential properties. Every 3 years we have aerial flights, so we've got updated information that we can go and look at. Okay, well, this is where you're at, this is what we see now, and this is the classification you're in. I think with that property owner, we've even gone out to the property a couple times and walked around. And it really does go back to, again, as Ashley's touched on a couple times. I mean, I don't know if I feel as strongly that impervious area is terrible. I think it really is a good metric, but it doesn't capture everything. And so, we get the arguments that I'm on the lake, my water goes to the lake, it doesn't go into your surface water system, so I shouldn't have to pay a fee. But then we usually sit down and talk with them that, well, you produce 400 trips a day on the city roads. You have to drive over 3 box culverts to go from point A to point B. If we didn't have the stormwater system over in this neighborhood where you're at, it would just all flood. How would you get to and from your home? And so, we kind of, again, the whole model philosophically, it always shifts people to look at their property because it's being based on this impervious area on my property. And that really is, like I said, I mean, it's not a terrible metric, but it always kind of comes back to that is, well, I've only got this much impervious area and therefore, this is how I feel about that. But we just try and direct people back to that overarching picture. It's you're buying in and you're using the city system that we're all trying to use, and that's what we've been tasked with these fees to manage and operate.
Councilmember Smith.
If we end up approving this and we have the loans going in there to finance the different capital projects, and I would assume every capital project has some surface water management aspect of it, and it's probably highly arbitrary as far as what percentage you could attribute to the fund or not. What would prevent us from, finding that, the West T37 on here as an example, that it's way over budget, and so now we're going to shift some of our capital projects here, and we're going to use our debt funding that we're authorizing here in order to make up for gaps on something else. I mean, is that from a city maybe that's more of a city manager question. Is that something that you would consider doing? Or would you slap your hand and say, no, no, no?
I would not say it's arbitrary. There has to be logic and reason for why you're charging a portion of a project to surface water, and you have to do it with a straight face, and you have to justifiably show the component of the project that the surface water is being paid for. That said, one of the first things you learn as a new city manager is protect the general fund, because the general fund is your only discretionary, unrestricted fund. And so one way you can protect the general fund is by offloading costs to other restricted funds, justifiably. And so, sure, yeah, whenever I can, I am going to try to get the surface water fund to pay for something. If I have a choice between the general fund paying for it and the surface water fund paying for it, I'm going to surface water fund every time, as long as I can justify it.
So to that point, and I appreciate your candidness on this, because that is my fear, is that it will always be when we all of a sudden have, bids that come back higher than expected or whatever they may be. Right now we've got this beautiful little 10-year projection that ends out with a positive cash flow at the end, but I can see that we could easily get 2 years or a year and a half into this and already be throwing it way out of whack because we've decided to throw everything into this because we have an unlimited taxing ability, basically. And so that scares me, I guess, is where I'm going with that.
As an engineer, Rob's right. The stormwater is very discrete. So it's specific pipe. It's manholes, catch basins, kind of a thing. Your only room for slop are your grand figures, the design fee, construction management fee, contingency fees. And to disproportionately weight those, it could be done, but I mean, it's parsing a design document, an engineering document it really would be hard to do with a straight face. So I wouldn't be overly concerned, and it's something that any specific project could be, okay, show me the numbers, and it'd be readily apparent that.
Yeah, and I would, just add too that it's not, it's not really arbitrary, just to kind of second what Rob was saying, but, outside of, being unethical, it's usually pretty straightforward. I've met with many of these project managers on these projects, and they work very closely with the consultants to really parse out, like Ashley was saying, it's, okay, this project is to build a sidewalk, we're only looking at the pipes and the catch basins and erosion sediment control, things that are very specifically surface water. So like I said, outside of being unethical, it's usually pretty clear.
On an operating standpoint, one of the things we have done to help our general fund situation is we have charged folks like me and Joanne a small portion of us to surface water, and that's one of the things that we've done to extend the lines out from crossing. Like tonight, I'm going to write tonight's meeting, these last 2 hours that we've been spending on surface water, I'm going to be writing that on my time card, and I'm going to be sending the bill to Richard. And
He appreciates it.
Yeah, and same with our city attorney. This was a surface water night, so that is going to be charged to surface water. I am being pretty aggressive about charging to surface water whenever I can, because I'm trying to protect the general fund for other council priorities.
Which is not arbitrary. It's reasonable discretion, I would think, which is not arbitrary.
So as the city manager just pointed out, we have been at this discussion now for almost 2 hours. I would just want to check to make sure everybody's satisfied, that we have everything worked out. If we don't, then we can continue talking. If not, we do have a budget that we need to start digging into a bit. So are there any other comments or concerns on this? Are we happy with the $3,500 hookup fee?
Do you still need
consensus here? So,
Sorry. Do you still need direction on the discount?
Yeah, that was going to be last.
Okay.
If we're wrapped up with the general facilities charge.
unless I hear any objections, I think we're wrapped up on the general facilities charge.
Yes, and last was the facility discount for maintaining private drainage facilities, and that would be something that, we would need to get your direction. I can come back and either continue pursuing that. It's not something that we need to act on as part of the 2019 rates or the general facilities charge, but it is something that I think should be considered and provide some direction on whether council would like me to continue pursuing, drafting some policy to change in our current policies to remove that rate reduction from what's been presented tonight.
Is that part of this model also?
This model does not include any of the rate discounts. So it's not specifically part of the model, but this model does not represent any rate reductions, if that's correct, right?
And remind us what percentage of your swim budget do discounts account for?
Well, and it's as development happens. I mean, every time a new parcel develops or redevelops and they construct these facilities, they become eligible for this discount. And that does apply both residential and non-residential.
But you had a number that you showed us the other day. How much money in discounts are you giving right now per year?
On a typical year now, that might range from $75,000.
Okay, out of a $2.8 million budget.
So what does council want to do in regards to the discount? Councilmember Danuski.
Just a thought, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but we've got the big 15% increase in the next 2 years. I wonder if we want to maybe delay the rate discount until after those 2 years, so you're not getting people to lose their, whatever your example was, a good $5,000, and then add another 15%. I don't know if how badly that hurts if we delay it one more year.
Well, currently, it wouldn't be effective until 2020.
Cash
So
flows.
it'll be one more, if we delayed it one more year after that.
The cash flows right now don't include any discontinuing of the.
Okay.
So if you kept the discounts going for as long as you want, these cash flows hold true. So if you did do it 2 years later, this actually gets better. As soon as you minimize or do anything to the discounts, this gets better.
Okay.
So I guess that's just one thought I have is if you're increasing 15% in 2 years, maybe not take their discount away until after that. But.
Plus, giving as much notice as possible is probably the polite thing to do to folks who have made those capital improvements.
We can prepare it that way. So I guess what I'm hearing is there is interest in the long run to eliminate the discounts, but just delay that until after 2020 at some point.
Do we have any objection? Councilmember Shrevenick.
Maybe it's just me, but I mean, again, what are other cities doing? Are they having these kinds of discounts held over from many years ago, or are they're continuing them? So we would be an outlier by getting rid of them.
Well, if we are directed to kind of dig deeper into this, I can certainly do a city comparison and come back with a comparison of what cities are doing. But it is, I do know there's a mix that have discontinued these. I believe Bothell does not provide them any longer. Can't recall, Kirkland may not either, but there are still other cities that are providing this discount, and that discount is maybe applied differently by cities. But that's something that we could come back and also look into deeper if that's what you'd like to see.
Anybody else have any strong feelings one way or the other on this? I think coming back with a little bit more information would be helpful, especially because we're now talking about doing it in 2 years out. So I think we have some time to finesse this a bit.
Good.
So, anything else? All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Let's dig into the budget. So we're looking at Surface Water Management Fund, Swamp Creek Basin Fund, Public Works Shop Fund, Equipment Replacement Fund, and other departments. Joanne Gregory.
Good job, Rich.
Actually, why don't we just take a quick 2-minute break, because it sounds like some people have run away and you guys have to get your presentation ready to go. So let's just take a quick break. We'll come back in 5 minutes.
I don't know how to get the projection.
I do.
I can get that for you. It's the number one.
It doesn't get any better than that, does it?
Oh, the little Whips app is on there.
Okay, I turned it off over there. I guess I wasn't supposed to do it.
And
Perfect. So we didn't.
That's what I was going to follow up on. I thought that's what the plan was, but then in the GFC, just doing the fee schedule?
but it has to go.
Resolution is the fee
I may be thinking, I may be thinking about it. I had a client that got sued.
Oh, you, I think the minor services have to do that.
That lawsuit all too well.
I think there's a rate change?
Not a rate change, the GFC.
Yeah, I think that. What group?
Okay.
If I have requirements.
You're certainly an expert on
If I
it.
have violations, then 35, 67, and 35 days.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah.
The rates we determined don't meet public.
Sometimes I do. What are we doing when? Because if we're just doing.
The one where they give the awards and stuff?
North Urban Human Services.
Residential and commercial conservation.
When we come back to the rates, we have both. I mean, we do have some. See parcel, so each parcel has one owner.
Particular agenda.
And it's,
That's what I'm we probably should clarify that in the rate.
and that, yeah,
If we say single family residential, we might want to say. Just so that you don't have to ask this question.
that'll be helpful for the rates too, because I don't know if they're applied.
All right, what page are we on? Where's surface water?
Also on the GFC report.
199.
Thank you.
Just home.
One 198, 199, 151.
Yeah, it actually, the narrative starts on 194 or 3. The charts. Surface water management, all the way back to, 193.
All right, we are back from recess, diving into budget. Ms. Gregory?
Good evening, Deputy Mayor Herbig, Council, thank you. We're going to proceed with the surface water budget now and some of the other funds that we have not yet been introduced this budget season, but we'll start with surface water, and I'll turn it over to Richard Sawyer at this time.
Thank you. Thank you. So, presenting the Surface Water Fund budget, and very similar to the process last night with Public Works and Engineering. The Surface Water Management Fund kind of funds the Surface Water Management Division of Public Works, which is responsible for managing both the constructed and natural surface water systems within the city. And this, as it states, involves capital projects, the operational budget, development, public education outreach, and water quality monitoring. The preliminary budget numbers are shown in front of you. The budget we've prepared, and I should point out, kind of following up the discussion we just had, this budget is based on the numbers that the rates that were already established. So this budget we prepared is balanced to our current rates. It does not presume any rate increases from the previous budget. And it doesn't necessarily have as much impact on the kind of the operational budget being presented, but that's going to have some changes on the capital side, because that's really where most of the benefit that we're going to see from the rate increase is. So I believe Joanne and I will have some work to do to make those adjustments and come back for the final budget approval. So moving forward, this was based on the 3.7 million 19 and 20 revenues, and the 4.37 million expenditures, which was about 11% increase over the 17-18 budget, and the ending fund balance of 685,000, which I believe that will be impacted by the rate increases. The Surface Water Management Division, as being proposed in 19 and 20, includes about 4.1 FTE. Myself, Surface Water Manager, and then we'll be supporting half FTE of a permit administrative specialist, 2 surface water technicians, and that's one of the changes being proposed. We have a term limited second surface water technician this year, and moving forward we're proposing to make that permanent. And I think there's some narrative in the budget that kind of justifies that, but as I touched on in the previous presentation, a lot of the surface water techs are involved with the facility inspections, which have grown quite a bit. I don't remember the exact numbers from the budget, but substantial growth in just the number of facilities, inspections, monitoring, kind of across the board that's expected from the city through our municipal stormwater permit or MPDS permit. And then we'll be continuing, as we have in the past, with seasonal hires, which kind of during those peak inspection seasons, they come in and do the conveyance system inspections. So while the technicians focus more on the water quality flow control facilities that we have in the city, the seasonal help come in and they just look in the catch basins, they check sediment levels, they check that the pipes are clear, and then spawn those work orders that just come in and just do that basic cleaning every year of the system. So usually 2 seasonals will come in, college interns, and conduct that work. For 1920 highlights, again, the NPDS permit really drives a lot of the programs that we do. I like to think we don't do them just because we're being told we have to do them through the NPDS program. I mean, a lot of these programs are just good surface water management to keep our natural resources clean, and our roads from flooding, and our citizens safe. But a lot of it is required through the permit. And the next permit is being issued in 2019, so we're currently reviewing those upcoming requirements. And each 5-year cycle, when a new permit comes out, it usually comes with, they'll either make existing programs kind of a little bit more stringent. So, for instance, in the previous permit, maybe you had to inspect X number of facilities and do maintenance, and now the next permit, they're going to make that, now you have to do twice as much as that in the next permit. And then they'll also slowly add new programs each permit cycle. So, which is true again with the 2019 permit coming out. There's going to be additional inspection and enforcement requirements on private facilities to start looking at not only is their facility operating, but now we have to start looking at what kind of practices and behaviors are they doing. Are they keeping sources of water quality pollution covered, stored in the right places? So there's going to be even more expansion of our facility inspection programs as one example of kind of those increasing requirements in the NPDES permit. My second point, which you've probably heard a couple times already, but surface water staff are going to be closely working with other public works staff with the implementation of the new public works shop. The fund will actually financially support about half of that staff. The maintenance workers, the maintenance lead, the administrative specialist will all have surface water funds helping support those positions. And in a practical matter, we also will be working closely with them. So the inspectors will be going out and looking at the facilities and creating the work orders, and then working closely with the maintenance workers, who then will be responsible for kind of following up and doing that work and working together to get it all done. So in 1920, we're going to be really focusing on making that new public workshop work and be successful. And then, other emerging surface water issues and projects, CIP, citizen concerns, so service requests, just like with other public works divisions. We deal with lots of new complaints and requests each week from citizens that we have to respond to, which could range from a couple phone calls in a couple hours to we still are responding to some that are 12 months old and take a lot of time to work with citizens and get completed. And the last point here, again, we'll be updating this with the rate increase being approved at the previous presentation, but from this budget, we were looking at a transfer of about $672,000 to capital. And then I wanted to end with a slide here on the priority-based budgeting. Similar to the other divisions, what I've taken here are kind of the main programs that we focus on and spend funds on, and then also show their corresponding PBB quartile scores. So as you can see, kind of under the NPDES permit, a lot of these programs fall under that, and many end up in those higher quartiles, which is to be expected. But operations and maintenance, so again, a lot of the work orders, doing maintenance on the ponds and the vaults and the conveyance system eat up quite a bit of the budget, and also accordingly score well in PBB. Managing runoff and development kind of corresponds with those private facilities, all the way from the development, the design, the construction, and then the handoff to the ongoing inspections that keep them operating and being maintained by the private property owners. Education outreach, public involvement, CIP, obviously. And interestingly enough, illicit discharge detection elimination scored low on PBB, but obviously responding to hazardous spills and water quality issues, in the system and going out into the streams and the lake, we are going to respond to and take care of accordingly. And that's kind of it for the high-level summary of the Surface Water Fund budget. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Do you have any questions? Seems as if everybody is kind of done talking about stormwater tonight. Either that or perfectly happy with the budget presented. So. Oh, jeez. Nice.
Okay.
Do you need me for the other one? Or
No,
Swamp Creek one?
I don't think so. Can excuse Richard at this point.
Thank you.
And the next item for tonight was the Swamp Creek Basin Fund. So from here,
Do you have a page number for that, or 202? Oh, that's next.
202.
Thank you.
So what is left as far as the budget presentations are the miscellaneous funds that we have not yet talked about. So last month, we talked about capital funds. Now we've gone through the general fund and completed that last night along with the street fund. SWIM is the other big operational fund, so now you've seen that. So most of these will be very brief, but please stop me if you have any questions about any of the funds as we go or any of the information that I have available for you. But I just want to give you a basic understanding of each of them. So the Swamp Creek Fund was a fund that we created to set aside the money we received from King County years ago under the Memorandum of Agreement, where they provided over $10 million to the city to be reserved for storm drainage projects. And most of that money was spent, and many projects were implemented. And we were, according to the agreement, required to maintain a reserve for maintenance. And as of December of this year, we project we're going to have about $1.4 million in that reserve fund. So we talked about this at the October 22nd meeting, and the staff had reached out to King County and said we would like to free up that fund to purchase some properties in the Swamp Creek area for flood prevention and open space, et cetera, and negotiate a new memorandum of agreement to allow that to happen. And so even though we had not budgeted any expenditures in this fund, it only just earns interest. There could be some actions that may come to pass in 2019 that would require us to do a budget amendment to spend this money. But at this point, there are no expenditures budgeted. And so that's all that is in that fund at this point.
Any questions? All right.
Okay.
Let's move on.
Great.
We would have to come forward for a budget amendment from you later if we wanted to use this for walkways and waterways or anything.
Right. I queried you and Debbie Bent, will that happen this year or next? And it looks like it's would probably not be till 2019. So I'm not going to make any adjustments to the fund at this time, and we'll do a budget amendment when we need to take some action. So the next fund in the lineup is the Equipment Replacement Fund on page 204. And this is a sinking fund that has the city established many years ago to collect funds from operating departments and other funds like surface water and street fund to set aside money to replace vehicles and equipment and certain network equipment and licenses and software. So that's what it's used for. It is projected to receive $142,000 this biennium from those contributing departments and funds. The only expenditures that we are anticipating at this point are about $75,000 that we've set aside for network, workstation, and software upgrades if needed. And we would have a ending fund balance at the end of 2020 of about $598,000. We're anticipating a lot of activity in this fund, though, because as we develop our public workshop, we will be buying large pieces of equipment and trucks, and as we procure those, we will be setting up replacement schedules for them and then assessing those departments for the future replacement, whether it's 5 or 7 or 10 years down the road. That activity has not yet been programmed into this fund yet.
Okay. Councilmember Shribnick?
Just a quick question. The telephone upgrades, the phone system upgrades that I think were maybe in the general fund, could those be, protecting the general fund, shifted into this fund?
I believe so. We talked about that this morning.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, you two think alike. Wow, that's weird. Actually, maybe it's not so weird.
No, well, thank you. I think that was a good suggestion. Are there any questions about the Equipment Replacement Fund?
Doesn't appear so.
Let's see what comes up next. All right. So I had another presentation that, from last night, that I wanted to continue. I thought that was it, but it's not. If you'd give me a moment, I think I can find it. Or not. Dear. Yesterday was the 29th, right? Not on here. Oh, yes it is. We just have to go back to the beginning of the presentation and skip over surface water management. So now we're going to back up a bit in the book to page 152. And the next fund would be the Kenmore Village Fund. Now, we established the Kenmore Village Fund a number of years ago to account for all the development and the general operations of the downtown area for the area across the street, known as Kenmore Village, and then also to account for the construction and operation of the town square and the hangar. And we have decided in this budget that we would like to consolidate and transition that fund, close that fund, and bring all of those operations into the general fund. Because the general fund was subsidizing the Kenmore Village Fund anyway and just putting money in there to keep it in balance. So it seemed like an exercise we didn't really need. The Kenmore Village doesn't generate any revenue of its own. So we are going to close it when we close the books at the end of this year and all the expenditures are paid. And we have incorporated for 19 and 20 the revenues and expenditures in the various departments of the general fund. We've got some revenue in the general fund from the two leases that we will continue to hold, DEVA and U.S. Postal Service. That generates about $95,000 a year. We put the expenditures for the movies, the summer movies, and the Why I Love Kenmore Summer Party in the city manager's group of accounts, along with the other special events that they're responsible for. Then the landscaping and the maintenance and the janitorial have all those expenditures have been moved to the Public Works maintenance for parks and facilities, those accounts. But in looking at all of those expenses and revenues for a year, you can see the expenditures total about $176,000. The revenues account for about $95,000. So this activity is a bit of a drain on the general fund. And no fees are being assessed for any use of the hangar. But it has to be paid for.
Do you have any questions? Councilmember Marshall.
Yes. And why does the lease income, why does it show zero in 2019 and beyond budgets?
Because we're closing the fund.
Oh, okay, just the flat out.
Yeah, the fund itself will go away, and those revenues and expenditures are now in the general fund for 19 and 20.
Anyone else? Okay. Let's move on.
The next fund would, next fund in order would be the Strategic Reserve Fund. This is a fund that the city has always maintained on page 155, and it was created years ago to serve as the city's rainy day fund. And because we call it a Strategic Reserve Fund, there's a state statute that says you can only put so much money in this fund. You can only restrict it. And, you can only, the restriction is 0.375 per $1,000 of assessed value for your city. We used to annually build the fund up when assessed valuation was rising, and then when the recession began and the assessed valuation discontinued its climb and actually started to decrease, we could not put money aside anymore because it would have been over the statutory limitation. Things have changed, and we have not yet funded it, although it is earning interest every year. And based on our 2019 preliminary assessed valuation of the $4.8 billion, we could fund it up to 1.813, which would be the new statutory limit. The budget does not recommend that, but that's just for your information. We do anticipate that over the course of the biennium, it'll earn almost $26,000 in investment interest, and at the end of the biennium, have a fund balance of $1.3 million.
Any questions? So we're just going to keep the money in the bank and collect interest for the next 2 years?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the plan. The next fund, I guess I could make this bigger, is the Strategic Opportunities Fund. And this is a fund we created 5 years ago to have resources available for key investments and strategic opportunities. And we funded it with $2.5 million from the general fund when our reserves had built up to a very substantial balance. And we've used it over the years to, I think we used it to purchase the Shell property down on 522, and we funded and paid for the incubator out of this over the current time. But as you may remember, when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, we have now also rolled the incubator operations into the general fund, the leases from the tenants of the incubator, and then the expenses of operating the incubator. So we are slowly building this fund back up, and it also lent money to the sidewalk projects a few years ago, and we're repaying the money from the Strategic Opportunities Fund with REIT, and in this biennium, $360,000 will come into the fund from real estate excise tax to repay that loan, if you will, that was made a couple years ago, actually, to do the undergrounding and the construction of the sidewalks on 182nd. It also is earning interest on idle cash or investments, $47,000. And the only expenditures program for this fund, which are new and recommended, would be $30,000 a year or $60,000 total to increase our contribution to ARCH. We are already budgeting $30,000 a year out of the general fund for ARCH, so this would double that.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I was actually really surprised to see that. One, I guess I was surprised that we doubled the contribution, but I was more surprised to see we pulled it out of the Strategic Op Fund in the proposed budget. Can you tell me why?
That was me. So I've met with various affordable housing advocates, and they're making the case for the fact that the need is greater than ever. I proposed it out of the Strategic Ops Fund because I wanted it to be temporary in nature. So I didn't want to propose it out of operating fund. So that's why it came out of Strategic Ops, is to help with a 2-year situation. One housing agency advocated that we increase our funding by tenfold. So given the need, and I talk about it in the city manager budget message, giving about the need, but again, strategic ops, because I wanted it to be temporary nature and not feel like you had to commit to it long-term.
Well, so I had a couple of thoughts. One, I do think it shouldn't come out of this, but we had created a policy not that long ago that had 5 criteria, and I didn't see that it meets either one of those 5. And I mean, that was the whole point of creating the policy, was to what that's supposed to be used for. And so
I'm not familiar with the 5 criteria. I'm sorry.
It's on either page
57.
63 or 157. Actually, it's on both those pages. It outlines the 5 criteria.
Page 157?
157, right in the middle, and then also on page 63, it also talks about it. It talks about, 63
I'm sorry, yeah.
specifically the strategic ops fund policy.
I see. I thought you were talking about funding for housing.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I'm definitely familiar with that.
So I guess so my question is twofold. One, I actually don't think it should be in here. I think it should be probably out of the general fund. But the other thing is, we're also, that's a doubling of our arch contribution. And I'm not necessarily, considering we've got significant tax increases we're looking at, I don't necessarily see that that's something that I would be supportive of.
Yeah. I feel like it meets criteria number 2, capital construction projects, because that's what it would go for. It would be for capital. But I mainly put it out there for discussion. I don't have a strong opinion on it. It was mainly for you guys to discuss it and tell me what you want to do.
Hang on, Councilmember Shrevenick and then Councilmember Marshall.
Well, now I have 2 questions. One is around that, and I'm curious, again, what are other cities doing, other cities of our size in the region? I know they're not exactly like us. But my original question was, and this is because I'm new, was the very first sentence on 157. The Strategic Opportunities Fund was first established in 2013 due to the strong fund balances in the city's operating funds, especially the general fund. And I guess my overarching question, and it's kind of a Rob question or a Joanne question, I guess, is in the last, what briefly, what has changed that we're in a really different position with our general fund at this point?
So first of all, we still have those strong fund balances. They have not declined. So we continue to spend less than we take in, and so therefore our fund balances are about where they have been.
Oh, okay.
It's looking ahead and seeing our operating revenues and our operating expenditures crossing in the 2 years from now. That's the problem.
Okay. So that's a different issue. Okay.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
yeah, we still have
Sorry.
those same, roughly the same fund balances that we've always had, because we've made sure to not spend more than we have.
Right. Okay.
But back to what do other cities do? So when I first got here, I noticed that our arch capital contribution was high compared to other arch cities. And so I made a recommendation to lower it, and it was lowered. The council agreed with me and lowered it. I think Bob Hensel was the one council member to disagree. So what I did is I brought it back to be kind of middle of the pack for arch cities back then. By doubling it, I'm sure we could get the numbers for you pretty quick, pretty easily, but by doubling it, it puts us probably near the top of the pack among arch cities. Now, if you throw in other cities that are not part of arch, like Mount Lake Terrace or Mill Creek, same population as us, I don't think they make any contribution to capital housing. And so if you throw cities like that in the mix, then we're really high.
Right, I was specifically talking about Arch.
Yeah.
Kind of the Arch community.
So we've been middle of the pack, but doubling, this recommendation to double definitely puts us above average among arch cities.
Councilmember Marshall?
So you believe that the 60,000 contribution to Arch fits in to number 2 because the money is going to go to Arch, but Arch then is going to perform its function of subsidizing housing that's
Yeah.
going to be built in Kenmore.
Well, not necessarily in Kenmore, but they will build affordable housing with that money.
Councilmember Smith?
I was going to say, one of the things, Arch is, it focuses on the east side for housing, and I think an important part also is there's a lot of cities on the east side that have a lot more of a negative impact on affordable housing, and they have greater resources, and they're creating more of the problem. Maybe that's not the right term.
Can I help with that?
Yes.
Yeah, so of the arch cities, Kenmore and Bothell are probably the most affordable.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
That's where I'm headed.
And therefore, one could make the argument that we should be contributing the least to the capital fund. So, again, as you can tell, I'm just trying to I just want to get the conversation going, and I can give you both sides of the coin.
I mean, I would say, so the last few years, I've been going to, Arch has been holding these meetings with electeds from different cities in the wintertime. I haven't seen one scheduled for this year, but last 2 or 3 years, I've been going to these representing Kenmore, and the discussion has been largely around actually the operating and capital contributions from cities. And I don't have the figures in front of me because I didn't cross my mind that we'd be having a big Arch discussion today, otherwise I would have gotten my ducks more in a row. But if I remember correctly, when Arch was founded, they set basic rates, kind of ranges for each city's suggested donation, and everybody kind of agreed to those. And those haven't been changed or increased since
A long time.
yeah. I mean, we're talking 15 or 20 years. So the ranges haven't moved. People's donations within those ranges have changed, gone up and down with the economy. People have given more than the range or less than the range. But overall, it's been kind of a guiding principles that, here's kind of the ballpark we're aiming for, and here's kind of what your share of that should be. There's been a discussion about how we can, as cities, increase that, because I think we all recognize that what we were giving 10 or 15 years ago isn't keeping up with demand and isn't keeping up with just inflation. And there was discussion, we've had multiple discussions here with Arthur about possible revenue sources that we could maybe lobby for the state to use for kind of dedicated revenues to pass through the city, construction, demolition tax, things like that, that we haven't yet gotten authorization from the state. But my impression from all of those discussions is that, yeah, we're still kind of grossly underfunding the problem. And I think right now, especially, we're grossly underfunding the problem. I would, an additional $30,000, it sounds like a lot when you say we're doubling it, but in the grand scheme of our budget and with the problems we're facing around affordable housing, $30,000 really isn't a whole lot. I would prefer if we could find a way to drastically increase that, but I was happy to see that the city, that the budget that we were presented had an increase. I mean, I would support moving this over to the general fund if that's something that people aren't comfortable with, but I would strongly advocate that we increase at some level what we're doing with Arch, just because right now it is such a growing and pressing issue in the region, and I think we owe it. Well, we don't owe it, but I think that it is something we need to be investing more heavily in, because $30,000 a year is not a ton when we're talking about housing.
I personally am not comfortable being the leader of the pack long term. I would see this as just a 2-year gesture to encourage other cities to up their game. But I don't think it is fair for us to be the leader of the pack forever. especially since these other arch cities have so much more housing that's so much more expensive. Plus, I think they have better, they're more endowed with better tax bases than we are.
I mean, to clarify, we're talking in dollar amounts. We're not talking leader of the pack. We're talking on a per capita basis.
Yes, thank you.
Because
Per
Bellevue
capita.
is kicking in way more than what we're discussing here. So is
Thank you.
Kirkland.
Thank you for that
Much larger
clarification.
cities,
It's
so.
per capita basis,
Yeah.
yes.
Councilmember Sherbick?
Yeah, that was one of the questions, but is there a way that when they receive that it could be framed as that? Because that's what I was wondering, is that, are you presenting this as kind of the grand challenge, and could it be actually presented in that way, that, we're doing
will
this,
be.
it's a trial basis, what we really want to do is encourage other cities to, essentially match or exceed.
So is it the Greater Housing Consortium? I get the name.
The HDC, the Housing Development Consortium?
That's the one.
Yeah.
They're probably the strongest advocate. What they'll do is they'll take our contribution, and then they'll go to Bothell and Kirkland and Sammamish and Redmond, and they'll say, look what Kenmore did. Yeah.
Councilmember Marshall? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Danuski.
So I guess I'm also a little concerned that we would, go into the leader of the pack thing. I think I would be more comfortable with this if Arch would change their rate structure. You said they hadn't changed their recommendations for many years. I think I'd be more comfortable with it for that, but I don't know. I guess I'd be okay increasing it some, but I don't know about the 30,000.
I mean, like I said, I don't have my Arch information with me. I believe that this probably still puts us within our range, because the ranges are pretty broad. I could be wrong.
Yeah, and I also think that once you do something, you're going to be expected to continue it.
Yeah.
So if we even frame it as a 2-year thing, we're going to be expected to do that. And
Yeah, it's the number that they will see.
yeah.
We did drop it a few years ago, and the world did not come to an end, and we didn't get run out of here on a rail. In fact, there was hardly any pushback. It sounds like, I'm sorry, but
Yeah,
just
Councilmember Marshall.
really quick, it sounds like you guys could use some more information rather than trying to wrestle with this tonight. So we could find out what the other cities are contributing on a per capita basis between now and Monday, I think. And then Council or Deputy Mayor Herbig, if you want to get us that info, or does Nancy Owsley have access to that?
I'm sure Nancy has
Okay.
quicker access to it than I do. But, I mean, I've got it buried somewhere in my Outlook, but
Okay.
I'm sure Nancy has it. Councilmember Marshall?
Maybe I could get consent for the idea of a letter to Arch for precisely the reason to urge them to improve or look again at their contribution structures, whatever they are, some diplomatic way to do that and say, hey, you got to update your stuff.
Well, and that's an ongoing discussion that's being had with Arch cities. It's the question is where to raising the kind of what everybody's expected to do without some new revenue sources is kind of the sticking point for a lot of cities. A lot of cities don't have wiggle room in their operating budgets to just bump up their contributions. So the conversation has very much been tied between upping the range with some new revenue sources, and that's the sticking point, because our hands are tied with the state on kind of where we can get those funds. So we're looking at they're looking at demolition costs. They're looking at a bunch of different things, but they haven't gotten the authorization yet, and they're still working on those in Olympia. So, but that conversation is definitely happening. But it's just finding the revenue side to make it work.
But maybe in terms of equity, we could actually write them a letter saying, examine the cities who are already contributing de facto based upon their low-income housing.
Can I speak
Yeah.
to that? So I know, because I've brought up that issue specifically with Arthur Arthur Sullivan when he was out here, and I feel like it gets downplayed by Arch, and I think the per capita basis is the most reasonable way to look at it, and I see absolutely no reason that we should be even anywhere above average on that, and there's so many other ways that we're also contributing towards affordable housing, both as a city in things we do, but also as a county and as a state. You know, there's things we're paying for all the time, and I just feel like I don't want to lead on this, and I would like to see it come out of our general fund, because then I believe it makes it have to compete at a level with our other services and things we're trying to find dollars for, because each time we, try to take something out of strategic ops, it does put us in a scenario where it just diminishes that fund more and more. And if the will was absolutely by everybody to keep it in there, then I would say then we should have a plan that there should be a plan to replenish the value that's taken out within the next, year or two after that. Then would be, but I don't like us to dip into it, is what I guess where I'm going with that. We're going to have, sorry, I know I'm dragging on, but this will come, whether it's Lake Point or other developments and stuff, there will be opportunities that we will need to go to this fund that will significantly fall within these very defined, these 5 things that I think are much more what the intent was set up to be.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yeah, I'm all in favor of the contribution. I just think it would be great to have the more updated information from Arch, and then we can use that to encourage all the other cities to maybe more accurately work on, or get an accurate idea of working on the homelessness problem.
Yeah, I think the last time we had that discussion was probably about a year ago with Arthur, and it might be time for an update. You might also just want to sit down with Nancy Owsley. She's our representative on the Arch Executive Board, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And she might be able to give you more background than what I have right now. So,
Yeah, and can I just say one more thing about that? Yeah, so the term that they use is arch parity. That's the term they use for what they expect the cities to contribute. Councilmember Smith mentioned per capita is a good gauge. I agree with that. I think if we could also add affordability in the jurisdiction, and so the really expensive cities in Arch that to live in should be expected to pay more. And so maybe you create an index that's based on per capita and affordability. Then Yarrow Point and Medina would be paying a lot.
and these are all discussions that we should be having with Arch. And I would point out too that it's not Arch coming to us saying, you need to pay X. This is an agreement that we all made when we joined Arch, that the cities made when they formed Arch together. Was, here's generally how we're going to operate, here's generally what we're going to be giving, and here's so these ranges aren't arbitrary and weren't just handed down from Arch. They were negotiated by all of the cities together. So because Arch is on some level kind of a subsidiary of us, they work for us, not the other way around. So Councilmember Danuski.
I was just going to chime in that I also agree that I'd rather see this in general fund rather than strategic opportunities.
City Manager?
Yeah, so we'll come back to you next week with more information on this. Can I mention a couple things about the Strategic Opportunities Fund?
Of course.
So what happened is 2013, one of those years, so we had $5 million in the general fund balance, which is a lot to have in a fund balance. So we took 2.5, we took half of that fund balance and created the Strategic Opportunities Fund. So the Strategic Ops Fund started with $2.5 million in it, and we have spent from it for various strategic opportunities over the years, and we've always found a way to replenish it back to the $2.5 million level. How? We do it through, we look at our general fund at the year's end, and if the general fund came in better than we thought, which it always does, then we take that money and we transfer it into strategic ops. That's how we've been replenishing strategic ops over the years, is taking our better than anticipated fund balances in general fund and transferring them over to strategic ops. And so as you can see, the projected ending fund balance at the end of this biennium, or this next biennium, is about 2.5 million, just a hair under 2.5 million, which is where we started.
Any other questions?
So would we continue this conversation next week and come to a decision as to whether it's in or out of this fund or in or out of the general fund once this other information is brought to the council and discussed?
Yeah, or if you want to increase the amount at all.
Right.
Yeah, let's have a discussion next week.
Okay. Okay, that'd be great. Okay, the next fund is the Public Art Fund on page 164. And this fund is meant to collect 1% for the arts from capital projects or construction projects in the city, and then be utilized to purchase art, display art, throughout the city. And I have to fess up here on this fund that I have not gotten on top of it. We do have some projects on this second slide that I've been trying to work with the capital project managers and figure out what is due to this fund, and also what projects have incorporated art into the projects rather than contributing to the fund. So what I've been able to determine is that the sidewalk project, the hangar, Morelands, Rhodey Boardwalk, and the Rhodey and Squires float projects, which were essentially completed during this past biennium, owe this fund some money. Over the next biennium, the walkways and waterways projects, all of them except for 68th, have an art budget and plan to incorporate art somehow into the project. The difficulty comes when projects start to go over budget, or they don't have capacity for 1%, and that seems to be the first thing to cut, and that's the issue with 68. I was trying to think of a way to get on top of that, and that maybe when we bring a new project to you during the CIP process and talk about the project and the funding for it and the resources to be used, the council could decide, do we want art or not? It is kind of the council's discretion to determine if art's going to be assessed to the project or not. I'm taking I guess the position that it always will be, but if there was a big budget constraint, that you could say, then we'll forego that expense. But I am trying to gather the information from the projects in 17 and 18, and those that have capacity, create a transfer to this fund to build it up beyond the $67,000 that is in there now. The hangar, we haven't done anything really with art.
I beg to differ.
Well, there is art, but
Okay.
I remember it was a big emphasis for a while, and then I haven't heard anything about it lately.
Well,
So yes, please.
So art is loosely defined. It's in the eye of the beholder. But so obviously we have some art in the hangar building. But that certainly isn't 1% of the project. But I would argue that there's some features that could qualify as art. The hot rocks, they could be art. The water feature. So I'm kind of liberally expanding the definition of art so that we don't have to come up with 40 grand because the hangar was a $4 million project, so 1% is 40 grand.
Yeah, I really just want to open it up to get feedback from the council on how you feel about the management of the art fund.
I mean, since we were talking about the hangar really quickly, what happened to the big piece of art that we were supposed to have? I know that, they didn't like, we didn't like the first, but are we still looking at putting something, a statement piece out there?
Councilmember Danuski, do you want to answer that question?
We are not currently considering that at this time.
Well-
No, I mean, we worked with that one artist, and we just couldn't quite get there with him. Our vision and his vision just didn't quite align. And I just haven't heard anything if we're going to look for something else.
So the decision was is we were going to wait for the full site to fully develop before we could truly make a decision about good art. So my thought, and I think based on the direction I got from that committee, was let's wait for the restaurant and the flyway to get built, and then we'll have a complete picture of the site, and then decide whether to do art there.
All right. Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Shribnick.
So I actually loved what the artist came up with, and I was disappointed that it got nixed, and I thought it would have been really a cool feature. But when it says here, under this, it says, the ordinance states that at least 1% of the awarded construction contract will be deposited in this fund. So is there a greater flexibility in the ordinance other than, because you said we don't do it when we get overruns, but according to this, that's not even a relevant part. It still should be funded. Does that ordinance have flexibility, or does it say 1% has to be deposited?
It's flexible in, I believe there's language that says the council has the discretion to determine if there won't be art. But I haven't really given you that opportunity to make those decisions,
Right.
and that's why it's troubling.
We spend, a lot of money on, for the love of Kenmore and everything, which is, I think, like a $20,000 thing or whatever. And it's great, and it builds community and love of city, but so does art. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe we don't have more art anywhere in this city. And I think this is actually an important part, and it's something that I think we should not make it discretionary, that we just have to stick to the 1%, and I would like to see us really make that work so we can have some fun art in our city. And, and I realize things like on the bridge, when the light features and the things, there's going to be art integrated into the architectural design, and that's probably well classifies or would qualify for this. But all the other projects too that we do, I would just like to see us I'd like to be committed to it.
Okay, that's good to know.
Councilmember Shribnick.
Well, I agree with Councilmember Smith about sticking with the 1%, but I guess I would like to see, and maybe it's in another document, what are the parameters of what we consider art? And I mean, the first sentence of this says public art displays or performing art events, which we haven't even talked about, and I would definitely like to see that be a piece of this. And I guess what I'm wondering is, I believe the Arts of Kenmore group, I don't know whether this is administered through them or decisions are made through them, but they are, okay, well, I guess I would like to see a group like that, that would be advisory toward how this is spent, and it would have both a visual art advocacy and a performing art bent as well, and that there would be some tension and people would actually have a dialogue about how this should be spent. I don't know that we need to, maybe we do, but I don't know that we need to get down in the minutia ourselves, but I guess I'd like to see a structure around that.
I agree. I think having a lack of a structure is why this languishes.
Yeah.
And the last time that we had a group actually discuss art was when we built City Hall, and there was a concerted effort to, Nancy Owsley led the effort to bring an arts commission together to select art for City Hall. And we used this fund to purchase art from Arts of Kenmore. We buy pieces of art every year out of this fund, but that's really all that is happening on an ongoing basis.
Right, and I'll give you a little bit more background. I should have said it in what I said is, I've been approached by David Evans, who says, is there an arts fund for performing arts? And I said, well, I mean, I think there's this 1% for arts. Call City Hall. I mean, I have no idea what happened to that, but I mean, there is this interest, and it'd be nice to have a structure around that.
City Manager.
I haven't had a lot of luck with art in my career. In my last city, we had an arts advisory committee appointed by the city council, and they met once a month, and we had to staff that. Guess how many pieces of art that committee produced in the 5 years I was there? 0. No, they met once a month. They burned tons of hours of staff time, and they could not make a decision. So art by committee is difficult. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's hard. At least I've experienced it to be hard.
Councilmember Marshall.
You guys been up in Everett lately? It's where I work. Art all over the place. There's a low-income population that's very visible around the courthouse in the area that I work, and then there is amazing art in little alleyways and on corners, and it's a range of pieces from just in crude terms, more abstract to more concrete, and even I think that probably the most concrete forms are the bronze figures, just human figures doing stuff, which actually, in my opinion, look kind of creepy when there's like little bronze children frozen in place. It's kind of scary. But there's all kinds of great stuff. It really brightens it up. The majority of it, I think, brightens it up and doesn't cause too much controversy. You're right, there's pitfalls everywhere. There's the Lake City, they're long gone now, but there were giant potatoes set in Lake City Way with the appearance of little like wings or knives cutting in them that everybody laughed at and mocked. There's all kinds of pitfalls, but I think it's definitely worth the risk.
Yeah, some cities have pulled it off. Walla Walla, Puyallup, Kirkland. They figured it out, and they figured out how to do it. I just haven't yet.
Councilmember Danuski.
So when we were doing the hangar, we did have a committee put together for the art on the hangar, and we had council members, we had some from the developers. We did have some Arts of Kenmore in that as well, and another art group that wasn't Arts of Kenmore. Yes.
Oh, for culture?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I guess one thing I just wanted to make sure everybody knows is I'm a huge supporter of Arts of Kenmore, but Arts of Kenmore isn't actually affiliated with the city of Kenmore. So,
Right.
Just to say Arts of Kenmore because they have the word Kenmore in there, it has to be involved. We might not want to go that far. But, when we have a big project, I think it's kind of reasonable to, put together a committee for that big project. But I don't know if we need to have thou shall do this all the time. Just a thought.
I'm going to say a couple things then. So I want to agree with Councilmember Smith and Councilmember Shrebnick. I actually think that, especially with our emphasis on fun, I think artwork is a part of that. It may not even be the biggest thing people see, but even just like the little wraps we've done on the boxes. I mean, that's not going to the art fund. It probably could, but little things like that. They just add a little personal touch and make Kenmore a little different and a little bit more memorable than other places, and I really appreciate that. I love the lightsabers that so many people can't stand, but I love them.
I love them.
And so I would strongly encourage that we continue with the policy and that we be a little bit more proactive on making sure that the funds are getting in there. The Councilmember Sherman brought up something that I hadn't noticed, and I think is interesting that we could use this for performing arts. Has there been any thoughts as we're trying to save money in the operating fund of maybe funding like the summer concert series out of there?
Yep.
I'm not necessarily advocating for it. I'm just tossing it out as an idea that just crossed my mind.
That's a great idea, and if the policy allows for it, then you certainly can. And it's your policy, too, so you can change the policy.
Yeah, and I think the movies could theoretically apply to that as well. And you said the magic word. You said it's hard, but we do hard things.
Touche.
So, and I mean, monthly sounds pretty onerous, but I'm just wondering whether there could be a quarterly something. And I mean, I'm happy to work with Councilmember Danuski and others to kind of put our heads together on what this could look like and who might be some people to approach and that kind of stuff. So,
Okay,
Any
well,
other, wait,
good
Councilmember Smith.
conversation.
I wanted to add, I think to Rob's point about the complexity when you have too many people involved, I would say smaller is definitely better. And if they're, people committed to it, then I just feel like, honestly, 3 would probably be plenty. Or whatever. I don't think it needs to be a committee of, 15 people, or you're never going to, like you said, you're going to meet once a month and never do a thing. And I was thinking the same thing about when you mentioned the concerts, about when I saw the performing arts. The only thing I would ask is if we're going to do that, because we do lack physical art here too, and we do a lot on the performance and we do a lot of other stuff, that I would just ask that if we are going to tap into it for something like the concert series, that we really do have to be committed to our 1%, so we can at least know we have the ability to build it up, rather than 3 years from now have it down to $5,000 because we funded the concerts for 3 years in a row or something.
That was definitely a concern I had when I brought up the idea, but
What's that?
that was a concern I had in my head after I said the idea.
Yeah,
out loud,
because
but-
it's, I so badly would I love to see something like, something interactive where people can't wait to drive by it because they can't wait to see what it is or what it's doing or who fixed it up or whatever. I just think that, obviously the Waiting for the Interurban is the classic on that. But even the ones, the bronze ones going up West Seattle after you cross the bridge, people always do fun things with them. There's just so many creative ideas that I think can really be fun for all ages of the community that we've just never had a chance to explore.
I remember when I was a kid and the bus tunnel opened up in downtown. I remember in the University Station, and I still do it when I walk through the University Station, they have the light bars, and you wiggle your head back and forth, and it makes a picture. And it still sticks with me, and it still fascinates me. Like little things like that just really, add some texture to life, and it's important. Anyway.
Great. No, that's great feedback. I'll start sending out bills to the project managers tomorrow.
They'll love it.
And I'll encourage them too, though, when they bring a project to you and talk about the project, to talk about the art element that they propose, or not. Either they'll fund the program or they'll provide art within their concept. Okay, Transportation Benefit District is the next fund on page 166. This is the fund that collects the $20 vehicle fee from the district that was established in 12. Anyway, it's no longer a separate district. As you know, we absorbed that into the city in 2016, so we consider it just a special revenue fund. And it is used to support transportation improvements and road preservation. Currently, all the funds that come into the Transportation Benefit District go to the street fund for street maintenance. And we anticipate receiving about $718,000 over this next biennium. And even though it says transferring that includes some interest, transferring $716,000 to the street fund with an ending balance. The idea is not to build up a fund balance, but we'll transfer as much as we possibly can without zeroing it out. I don't know why the projection came off $2,000 off, but anyway, so the money comes into this special revenue fund, and it could be used on transportation capital projects, or it could be used on transportation maintenance, and right now we're using it for maintenance.
Yeah, and I am of the opinion that this fund should be zeroed out. There's no reason to keep a fund balance in here. 109,000 is too high, in my opinion. So.
Is there a city policy that's keeping it?
No, it's just a pass-through fund.
It's just a pass-through.
No, I just thought maybe we had one of those,
No, there's no minimum balance to be retained.
Any questions or comments on this one? I mean, I would just toss out there that with the discussions we've had around our pavement preservation and how grossly underfunded we are on that, I would strongly encourage us to have a discussion sooner than later around looking at the other $20 in TBD that we could be assessing. And because if we don't look at that, then we need to figure out some other ways to keep our pavement from deteriorating further and increasing our costs when we have to replace it.
Good idea. It's about $350 a year. It doesn't grow very much. I mean, it's just whatever cars are licensed in Kenmore. So it creeps up slowly, but nothing dramatically. But $350,000 a year makes a little dent.
Bringing in $700,000 a year versus $350,000 a year would let us.
And the Lamborghini that's on there, or whatever that is, it only pays $20.
Yeah, I don't.
And the smart car that isn't on there only pays $20. Yeah.
But let me add, as a guy who likes to ride motorcycles and has a few motorcycles, I have to pay $20 on every one of those licenses. And I think it's very unfair because I can only drive or ride one vehicle at a time, and yet I have to pay, because I've got a little Trail 90 Honda that's street licensed, I have to pay another $20 for that, on that license fee. And I find it to be a very unfair fee in that respect, because we didn't exempt motorcycles, we didn't exempt how many vehicles somebody might have. Somebody could have 4 vehicles. It doesn't mean that they're driving them all at the same time. And I think this doesn't address that aspect of it. And so to me, I think it's an unfair tax from that perspective. I know I'm not getting sympathy, but I wanted to make it.
Well, I mean, I would argue that, none of our revenue streams are particularly fair. This is what we have, though, when it comes to getting money dedicated for transportation. And we do have authorization from the legislature to bump that up to $40 per year if we wanted to, and then up to $50 after a few years of having it at $40, if I remember correctly. And as we're approaching, if we're dealing with this, if we want to deal with the pavement preservation, this is probably part of that conversation. But that's for later.
The next fund I'd like to draw your attention to is on page 168. This is our general obligation bond fund, which was established to collect the excess levy revenues that began being assessed in 2017 when the Prop 1 was passed. So that's part of that's an additional tax levy over and above our regular property tax levy. And the revenue comes in with the property tax payments, and then we pay the debt service on the bonds semi-annually. So when we sold the bonds, we incurred a debt of $9.2 million. Debt service for 2019 is $1.2 million, with $950,000 of that is principal, $273,000 of that is interest. I anticipate that the levy for this year, for 2019, will have to be about 25 cents per thousand to collect that debt service requirement. Now, based on the bonds that we have issued, this original tranche that we called it out of the total authorization, debt service on this particular series for 2020 would only be $529,000. But as you know, the plan is to potentially issue another series of bonds late in 2019 to fund the balance needed for the rest for the projects. So since we haven't done that yet, I haven't programmed the debt service, what it could be, into this fund.
Councilmember Smith.
I have a question on that. So So, oh, okay, actually, never mind. I think I answered.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's really just a fund to collect the tax levy and pay the debt. As simple as that. I probably made it sound even more complicated than it needed to be.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, the Real Estate Excise Tax Fund is on page 174. This is the fund that is the repository for the real estate excise tax, the 0.75% or 0.5% that is assessed on real estate transactions. And these revenues are restricted for capital purposes. And we talk about these a lot when we look at our CIP program, because REIT pays for a lot of our capital program. We anticipate in this biennium we'll bring in about $2.6 million, and the projected revenue is just solely based on the trend that we are seeing. It's a little bit conservative over what we received this last biennium, which was a record breaker, but it's not continuing to come in at such a high rate. I think it's leveling off a bit. And in the capital program, we have programmed $5 million worth of expenditures. $360,000 of that will repay the Strategic Ops Fund for money that was advanced in 2014. $900,000 will go to the Park Capital Fund to support park projects, and $3.9 million will go to the Transportation Capital Fund to support a variety of transportation capital projects. And we will likely draw this fund down pretty low in 2020 unless revenues kind of pick up again. But that's okay. I mean, we're rolling it out into our capital projects, so I'm not concerned about that. And we look at the projections for the REIT every time we look at the capital project, so we try to stay up on that as much as possible and give you that information as our projects change. Are there any questions on the Real Estate Excise Tax Fund?
Doesn't look like it.
Oh, okay. Walkways and waterways. So we established a new fund, and this is where the proceeds of the bonds went. So the levy went into the bond fund. The proceeds of the sale of the bonds went into the Walkways and Waterways Fund, and we received $9.8 million. And we make transfers then to the Park and Capital Funds as needed to pay for the expenses of the projects. And we anticipate that about half of that $9.8 million will be spent by the end of this year, with a $4.7 million ending fund balance. Now, because we did adopt a capital program that assumes we are going to issue another $10 million worth of bonds, I did assume that in this fund as well. So that would be revenue coming into the fund. It won't be $10 million. It will probably be something less, as it was before. This fund does earn interest. $45,000 is anticipated for this fund. And then we've programmed $1.1 million of expenditures for Squires Landing and the Log Boom Park projects, and over $7.5 million for Juanita and the 68th Avenue projects. And with that new bond issue, we should have an ending balance of about $6 million at the end of 2020. You remember one of the commitments that we have when we issue bonds is to expend those funds mostly in about a 3-year period. So right now we're on track to do that. Any questions on this fund? Okay. Impact fees are next. Park impact fees are on page 185. We talked a little bit. They came up in conversation this evening in talking about the swim GCM. Anyway, so the park impact fee has not changed for a number of years, and we are getting ready to execute a contract with, or at least interview consultants to help us re-examine the park impact fee that we have been assessing. It's $2,642 for a single-family residence, and it has been that way for quite a while. We use park impact fees to support our park projects, particularly restricted to projects that increase capacity. So we started, expect to receive about $492,000 over this biennium and utilize $347,000 for Twin Springs, the Rhododendron Park, float mitigation, Squires, Rhododendron, and the ball field EIS, with a projected ending fund balance of $478,000 at the end of the biennium. The revenue projections for this fund and the Transportation Impact Fee Fund are derived from the Development Services Department. So when Brian Hampson's group looks at development anticipated over the next couple of years, and he's the one who provides the estimates for building permits and plan review and land use fees. He also helps develop, based on those projections, what he anticipates the impact fees will be as well. So that's where those projections come from.
Mr. Smith?
I remember when we talked briefly about the impact fees and about indexing it. Did we? I can't remember if we decided we were going to come back to talk about that when in this discussion now, or did we decide that we could, as a body, that we could index it, and we agreed to do it every year? I remember having a discussion. I don't remember what we concluded.
I think we just talked about it last night.
Was that last night? It's all blending together.
I was like, I don't remember this discussion. So
Maybe a week ago. We did. That is the only thing that has increased this fee over many years, is that there was a period of time when it was regularly indexed to a CPI indicator, and then during the recession we stopped. The council decided to stop indexing it, and we kept it stable. But we are able to do that, and the recommendation was that we would do that this year, and it would be incorporated into the fee resolution.
Okay. Well, I would love to incorporate that it be done every year, just so it's in, I think it makes sense.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't know how that has to happen, if I need to make a motion that has, or what do you need? How do you proceed?
We'll bring it forward in the fee resolution next month, I believe.
Yeah, later in November.
And if you don't like what you see, you can change it there, but looks like we're going to come back with a CPI increase on it.
Okay. But it will just specifically say 1 year increase or 2 year increase, or are you going to write it so that it'll be an annual increase?
No, the fee resolution is only for the upcoming year.
Okay, I got
Right.
you. I got you. Okay.
So knowing if that's the feeling, the direction from the council, when we prepare that fee resolution every year, we'll prepare it with that in mind, bring it to you for approval, point out that we have done that, but you approve the fee resolution, which includes this fee as well as many, many other fees, not all of which are indexed.
Is there any objection to
Does
that?
work?
Councilmember Marshall?
Just didn't know if we had, or obviously if we would going to get legal input on it.
We can certainly do that.
And whether we can increase them by CPI? Sure. We have been doing it in the past. But
We'll make sure that there's nothing has changed to cause us not to do that. Are there any other questions about the park impact fees or projects, or we can move on to the transportation impact fees?
I just want to point something out, and you probably saw it when you adopted the CIP a couple months ago, but we are using park impact fees to supplement walkways and waterways park projects, which is a legitimate thing to do. We were questioned by one of our coworkers on whether you can use impact fees on a bond-funded project, and the answer is yes, you can. So,
Transportation impact fees are on page 186 of the budget. Very similar discussion. Transportation impact fees are received from new development and that creates additional demand and are used on projects that increase capacity. This impact fee is currently $9,600 for a single-family residence. I don't remember when that was established, but I know it's been much more recent than the park impact fees. The 1920 projected revenue for transportation impact fees, about $1.9 million, and $1.2 million is programmed for sidewalk projects, 68th Avenue, Walkways and Waterways project, as well as the West Sammamish Bridge Fund. And the projected ending fund balance is $2.7 million. And what you don't see is that in the next biennium, we anticipate using the bulk of that $2.7 million again on the West Sammamish Bridge. I can't remember if it's the West Sammamish Bridge or the 68th Avenue. But it's a big fund balance, and it's there for a reason, because in 2021, we anticipate we'll be needing this for one of those projects. I think it was 68th Avenue. Again, it's something that we look at very closely whenever we bring you the CIP. We look at the 6-year forecast.
So on that, can we do the same thing on this impact fee?
Yes.
And automatically tie it to the CPI index?
Yes, we can. And I think generally we have always treated them the same, whether we inflated it or not. And we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
So that is the last slide, but I didn't prepare a slide for some reason for the new Public Works Shop Fund, but there is a section in your budget for that on page 191, I think, because we do anticipate in this biennium something happening to establish a shop, and we needed a facilities or a capital type fund to account for that. So that's the purpose, and it was built off the work that Ben Yazigi did in anticipating what the shop might cost, what the land acquisition may cost. That's all still pretty up in the air right now. We don't necessarily anticipate anything will happen in 2019, but it could. We can amend the budget if we need to, but he anticipated that this new shop might cost $6.5 million. We would pay for that with a note or borrow it from some source. So I've just created a mechanism and a fund to account for that when it starts to happen. Pretty simply put. So that is the end of these funds tonight, and I'll take any questions you might have.
And that would include, obviously, a yard, if it were conceived as merely a yard.
Yes, whatever it turns out to be, exactly. It wouldn't include, it's not staff or equipment, this is the facility. And we did include it in our capital facilities plan last month.
All right. Looks like we're good.
Looks like we're good. Looks like we caught up.
So what's the rest of the schedule then?
So the schedule is that next week we would hold a public hearing on the tax levy. So there would be a presentation about the tax levy and the impacts of 1%, 3%, whatever you please. And it would give the public, it's been noticed, an opportunity to speak to that, and then an opportunity for you to have a discussion, ask questions about that. Aside from the tax levy, I'd also if you have other follow-up questions, it'd be probably a good time to iron out any undecided issues with the budget.
And I would ask that when we're discussing when we're discussing the levy, that we have information on kind of what the cost will be to the average home and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
I know you probably have that, but it's always helpful to see that.
I'll try to make it as comprehensive as possible.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shrubnik?
So this is coming up on, Monday, but is there another hearing for the overall budget or not?
The following week.
That is the following week, okay.
Yes,
So
then
that's the-
I will
which
present a
is the
summary
holiday.
of.
So are we talking about the 19th or?
Yeah, final passage is 19th.
19th,
Under
okay.
current schedule. Unless,
That's when
correct.
Yeah.
so it's the same day?
no,
The
no, no.
hearing is the 13th.
12th.
Well,
Well, 12th is a
12th is a
federal
holiday.
holiday.
You're right,
So-
13th.
So we have a meeting on the 13th, Tuesday.
Oh, we do? Okay, I'll be gone. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know
Yeah.
if Milton's still gone.
Bad time for a holiday.
I don't know how many people will be here if Milton's still gone too, so, but yeah, you'll have a quorum. So,
One other thought on budget is, so I am seeing some hesitancy, reluctance to go with to tap into banked capacity. So I met with a management team this morning and talked to them about additional cuts we could make so that we're only doing a 1% increase. And so I gave them all some homework over the next couple days, and we're going to get back together on Thursday to discuss what we all came up with. So it was by not tapping into banked capacity, that means we would need to find $300,000. You remember me talking about that? But also remember that last night you voted to add a halftime recreation coordinator, and so that's about $50,000 a year. So that's another $100,000. So I'm telling my team to find $400,000. And if we put the Arch capital contribution back into the general fund, that's another $60,000 that we'll need to find. So it's really, I'll tell my team tomorrow that there's another $60,000 they need to find. So.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
we just pulled a few things out of the general fund too, as of tonight, right? We pulled the phones out, we pulled the concert series out. I thought there was a few other things that we talked about as well, but.
Right, so those are all ideas that are going to be put into that recommendation.
Oh, I see what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't formally make any changes
Got
to it. It was just
Okay.
ideas tossed
Never
around.
mind.
No, but yeah, you're on the same wavelength as me,
Okay.
though. Yeah.
Councilmember Smith?
I can't believe I can't remember this, but the 60,000 on the Arch, was that the full amount, the 60 each year, coming out of the strategic ops, or was it only the additional 30? on
Additional
each year?
30. So, yeah, so our general fund already has 30.
It
that
already
we-
has the 30, okay,
that we've
thank
been.
you.
Yeah, so I was proposing to do another additional 30 per year from strategic ops, which is a total of 60. So we'll see what we come up with.
All right, do we have any staff reports? Anything big
Nope.
since yesterday? Councilmember reports? No? I have one small thing, and I'll forward an email to everybody so that you have this too, but I received a call earlier today from somebody I've worked with in the past who works at Metro in their government relations, who has heard our grumblings about the 234 and wanted to reach out to me. And she sent me a very comprehensive email about exactly what their public process looks like. They're going to have 2 public meetings next week, one on Monday from 6 to 8 at Kingsgate Library, one on Wednesday the 7th at Kirkland City Hall, where they'll be taking public comment on not just the 234, but their entire Northeast strategy. And they encourage people to attend. They have been hearing from a lot of folks, though, who would be affected by the route change on the 234. Their public engagement period ends November 13th, and then they're going to have what they call staff partnership meeting, where all the jurisdictional staff get together on December 4th, where they'll start putting together their proposal for the King County Council, because the council is the one that actually makes the routing changes, those decisions. So they offered some more, to meet with city staff or elect, any of us that want to talk about that further. I'll forward you all the emails so you have that. The message I got was they are hearing us loud and clear. They're aware that a letter is going to be coming their way, and they think that's a helpful input to have. But they have been definitely hearing from us, both formally and informally, so far. So just want to pass that on. I'll forward the email over to everybody, so you have that. Yeah, I don't see. Hey, Rob. Do you think that we can post the public meetings and emails and how they can participate, make another push on our Facebook page?
Absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great. And maybe, if we have an email scheduled to go out in the next week or so.
Yes.
Okay, that'd be great. Unless there's anything else to come before us, we are adjourned.